Under the ground of the Witch Palace, there was an altar, which had the highest secrecy level of the whole White Lotus Sword Palace. The altar of deity. Amongst all the witch palaces all over the endless gods' domains, there must be such a forbidden place, where it was used for witches to pray and communicate with gods. In different worlds, the altar of deity built by the witches would take on different features. This altar in the White Lotus Sword domain was an ancient altar full of the style of the Eastern gods' domain. The most central part of the altar was a pattern of yin-yang twin fish, showing the principle of both rigidity and softness. Around the pattern of yin-yang twin fish, there was a circle of blooming lotus petals, which looked pure and flawless. Above the altar of deity, there was a pattern of the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers, which symbolized the belief of the Eastern gods' domain. At the same time, there was an ancient sword piercing through the sky. It was a mark left by Yun Hai the sword master, which represented that the altar of deity was blessed by him, a sky sword. Witches didn't believe in a certain god, but would choose the most suitable god according to the rules of their own world, and build the altar of deity that was suitable for the style of their world. If a witch was strong enough, the witch herself could also be summoned by other witches. God witches weren't the puppets of gods, but a special force formed by women who had the ability to communicate with gods. They respected gods, but they weren't puppets. They were good at communicating with gods, and generally, they would guard the world they were born in. If it wasn't necessary, they wouldn't leave their own world. The witch palaces existed in many worlds in the endless gods' domains. The witches were a special scene of many gods' domains. They believed that there were 8 million gods in the world, and even a stalk of grass, a piece of wood, or a road contained the possibility to become a god. Witches were the earliest channels of communication between humans and gods. Before the first star bridge was built, they had already taken root in a lot of gods' domains, taking on the task of communication between humans and gods. Many witches, because of their friendly relationship with the gods, would even be chosen as apostles of the gods, becoming the spokespersons of the gods in the mortal world. Red Lotus and White Lotus were the witches blessed by gods. Their talents were so great that a special existence chose them to be its alternate apostles. Even the imperial family of the Great Sheer Sword domain would treat them with great honor. "Sister, are you ready?" White Lotus sat in the center of the altar of deity. The star and moon ring on her hand radiated a soft glow. In an instant, she entered an incredible realm of emptiness. With her eyes narrowed, she realized that she had left the real world and entered a gap between dream and reality. Will we really use the cryolite as the sacrifice? Red Lotus still felt that it was too wasteful to use the precious cryolite in this sacrificial ceremony. After all, even if the sacrificial ceremony failed, they would still pay a price. If they used the cryolite but summoned nothing, it would really be a great loss. Moreover, it was easy to summon a god but was difficult to send the god away. Every year, there would be witches who unluckily died in the sacrificial ceremony. In any case, before starting the sacrificial ceremony, witches would adjust their mind to the best state and prepare the best sacrifices at the same time. Once a month was the minimum time for a talented witch to recover her energy and strength. In fact, most witches could only hold the sacrificial ceremony 1 or 2 times in a year. Even if they had done everything they could do, there would still be a small chance that they summoned monsters that should never appear in the real world. Yes, I want to challenge myself this time. I think that this time, we can summon a very special god. White Lotus looked at Mai with a confident look, although Mai was yawning with a bored look. Well, be careful. If something goes wrong, stop the sacrificial ceremony as quick as you can. Red Lotus found that her sister was strangely persistent today. It's too strange. She wasn't such a stubborn person before. Do we really need to compensate for that, maid? Even so, it would be sufficient just to use the fire-type ruby as the sacrifice. Then, get ready to sacrifice. White Lotus would not tell her sister that the cryolite was prepared for the prince from the very beginning. Okay. Red Lotus had to raise her hands helplessly. All things, all gods in the endless gods' domains, listen to my voice. Along with White Lotus's whisper, the most mysterious ceremony of the witches began. What was going on now was the first stage of the ceremony, sacrifice, displaying the sacrifice in front of those old, powerful existences. It was equal to telling them, hey, there is a gift for you. Come here. In the infinite time and worlds, all things that are immortal, I present my gift to you, praying that you can pay attention to this corner. The pattern of the yin-yang twin fish started rotating, spreading the auras of the twin witches. I present this treasure to you, and if you are satisfied with it, please respond to my voice and come to this altar. The cryolite became transparent bit by bit. It was the sign that it was being wrapped around by the power of contract, turning into an equivalent exchange. Language and cognition. Behavior and phenomenon. Heart and body. Bleeding my blood as a witness, I'm looking forward to your coming. White Lotus stretched out her arm. Her fingertip cut her skin, letting a drop of blood fall to the altar. Red Lotus also stretched out her arm and pricked her skin, presenting her blood for the ceremony. This was the second reason why witches needed to rest for a month after holding a sacrificial ceremony. My, Star Snow, blinked her eyes and looked at the twin witches in confusion. It's your turn. If you want to get the benefits, you must pay with your blood first. Red Lotus quickly pricked Mai's fingertip using her Red Lotus holy sword. A drop of crimson blood dripped to the ground. The humans who take part in the sacrificial ceremony must present their blood as the price, otherwise, they wouldn't be able to absorb the god's aura in the ceremony and improve themselves. The principle of equivalent exchange was a basic rule in any world. What you want is what you must pay for. The sacrificial ceremony was already one of the safest methods to improve one's talent in the endless god's domains. Although the success rate was only about 1/10, most of the time, a failure will only cost a drop of blood, therefore, it was actually a highly profitable business. Of course, there was also a probability in the world called bad luck. The unfortunate witch who summoned the nightmare was a living negative example. Red Lotus's blood fell on the cryolite and emitted a red, fire-like light, which is also the embodiment of her essence, the privilege of the Sun Witch. White Lotus's blood was on the contrary. When her blood dripped onto the cryolite, it immediately turned transparent and in an instant, it merged with the mist in the cryolite. As for Mai's blood, actually, Yunxi's blood, it had undergone a very strange change when it dripped onto the cryolite. At first, it was a pale gold light floating in the cryolite. Then, the cryolite became hotter and hotter, scorching the air. After a long while, the transparent cryolite, which was filled with mist, had become a beautiful golden red gem. No one would believe that it was a cryolite just a moment ago. It's not the same as last time, Red Lotus murmured in a confused tone. She looked at the gem, whose color and even size had completely been changed. If she hadn't witnessed the whole process, she wouldn't believe that a cryolite could transform into a golden red gem. It's normal, because it's cryolite. White Lotus narrowed her eyes and told the lie with a straight face. After absorbing my prince's blood, the cryolite would naturally change. I would feel strange if it didn't change. Anyway, my sister knows nothing about the sacrificial ceremony. No matter what I say, she won't doubt my words. Moreover, it wasn't a lie. After all, I just said, because it's cryolite. So, is it the sacrifice this time? Red Lotus sensed a distinct aura from the golden red gem. She could vaguely feel the power inside it, which was far superior to the power of that valuable fire-type ruby. With it, we can summon a god that is far stronger than that fantastic creature last time. Yes, this is a sacrifice from my sister and I. When we open the door tomorrow, which god will appear in front of us? I'm really looking forward to it. White Lotus placed the golden red gem in the center of the altar and prayed. The sacrifice has been delivered. After 1 day and 1 night, I look forward to your arrival. No matter where you come from, we welcome you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. The golden red gem suspended in the middle of the altar of deity gradually became transparent. In about 10 seconds, the gem completely disappeared from the altar of deity, which was a sign that the first stage of the sacrificial ceremony had succeeded. I'm exhausted. After this sacrificial ceremony, I must rest for several months. After making sure the sacrifice had been offered smoothly, Red Lotus complained and moved her stiff right hand. If she hadn't drew out her sword and cut Mai's fingertip, the sacrificial ceremony would have failed at that time. Because her sister White Lotus was slightly anemic, the blood she bled was actually 3 times more than Red Lotus, so she was tired. Fortunately, she was the Sun Witch, her natural vitality was several times more than White Lotus. Therefore, she would recover quicker from the tiredness. Compared with her own tiredness, she paid more attention to her sister. She clearly saw that after the sacrificial ceremony, White Lotus' face was somewhat paler than usual. Yes, she realized later that holding a high-level sacrificial ceremony was also a heavy burden on the witches themselves. Although there was no record that a cryolite would attract any dangerous beings, it was always wise to play it safe. This was only the second time White Lotus had held a sacrificial ceremony. Is it too risky to use cryolite as a sacrifice? White Lotus, are you tired? Red Lotus looked nervously at her sister White Lotus, whose face looked as pale as paper. The spiritual power I consumed was much greater than I had expected. White Lotus didn't tell the truth. The burden of sacrificing this golden red gem had almost drained her spiritual power. The process of turning the golden red gem into a sacrifice and sending it to the altar almost emptied her whole body. There was no doubt that this was not the normal consumption for sacrificing a cryolite. Just as her sister Red Lotus, whose vitality was 10 times more than any normal person, as the Moon Witch, her spiritual power was also 10 times more than any others, which was sufficient enough to afford the consumption of her spiritual power sacrificing a cryolite. With such a high price, this time, what on earth will be summoned? The prince's blood is indeed unusual. Let's go. Go to rest. Looking at her sister's tired face, Red Lotus was panicked and hurried away with White Lotus from the altar of deity. Mai, Star Snow, looked at the altar and went out to bask in the sun happily. Basking in the sun is still the most comfortable thing to do. After running back to the roof of the Witch Palace and laying down, Mai, Star Snow, was satisfied facing the sun. Until the sun went down and the night screen had hung down, she reluctantly jumped off the roof of the Witch Palace and began to look for a place to stay overnight. Star Snow was actually a natural ice-type creature. In theory, she should like cold places. However, she preferred to bask in the sun. She liked all the places that could let her feel warm. After sunset, she wandered around in the Witch Palace and finally found a truth: she had lost her way. It was not because she was a roadfool, but because the structure of the Witch Palace was full of trees, gardens, and dazzling corridors, which was too complex to her brains to remember the way. Mai, Star Snow, stood her ground and looked foolishly at the corridor, which was actually leading in 8 directions. What should I do now? Smiling. It seems useless now. Maya and Yoon, she had not yet had time to teach her the skills to find the right path in such a complex situation. Finally, desperate Star Snow could only follow the only familiar scent here, walking in a completely unfamiliar direction. Soon, she came to a room in the Witch Palace, where only the twin witches of fate could enter, which was the bedroom of Red Lotus and White Lotus. It was just because she couldn't find any place to sleep. It must be because of the will of the universe. On the big bed, the twin witches had fallen asleep and were protected by a special guardian magic circle. Nothing could invade into the magic circle and disturb the twin witches' sleep. After having consumed a great deal of energy and blood, both of the twin witches, White Lotus and Red Lotus, needed to sleep to recover themselves. Therefore, this room was closely protected by the magic circle. Unfortunately, it wouldn't work against the person who held Cassina's token. After wandering in a circle in the room, Mai, Star Snow, found several pastries. She gracefully nibbled on the snow-white pastries and nodded her head satisfactorily. To be fair, Star Snow's performance was definitely the best one amongst the 3 sisters, because she had perfectly met all the requirements from Maya. She just looked for a quiet place to bask in the sun, didn't talk with any girls of the Starwing Knights, and even walked into the Witch Palace, where it was so sacred that no one apart from witches could come in. If the twin witches hadn't found her, what she did would have really been perfect. Unfortunately, no matter how perfect she had been, once night came, there would be a big problem. Where to sleep? Puff. After stretching herself, Star Snow convinced that she had successfully accomplished the task today, and her master seems to be coming back soon. Star Snow looked around and ran to the bed of the twin witches. The magic circle was literally nothing to Mai, who held Cassina's token. A lady should sleep in bed at night. This was one of the basic knowledge Maya taught the three sisters of the Star Spirit team. Naturally, Star Snow complied with it 100%. But, to her surprise, why did her hands naturally move when she got into bed and lay down beside the twin witches? In less than 10 seconds, the hands themselves had taken off Red Lotus witch clothes, leaving only a red band on her hair. As her witch clothes were stripped, Red Lotus' beautiful, snow-white body was totally exposed in the air, spreading the unique fragrance of the girl. Looking at Red Lotus' white and tender skin, smooth and slender legs, Mai, Star Snow, stretched out her hands with curiosity. After being stripped of her red witch dress, exposing her delicate legs to the air, it was difficult to imagine that their master, Red Lotus, was actually a girl of strong personality when she was awake. Mai's hand gently rubbed and pinched Red Lotus' slender and delicate white toes. Her pink toenails glittered like shells on the beach, giving Mai, Star Snow, a too strong temptation. White Lotus. Don't believe that the prince really exists in the world. Without you, I would have nothing. In her sleep, Red Lotus' cherry-like mouth was half open and half closed, and it seemed that she was entreating for something. No, it's itchy. There, don't touch that place. Her cherry-color lips shivered slightly as she breathed. Mai, Star Snow, only looked at her master's hands in confusion. Why are my master's hands so skilled? Well, that was all, master. That was what Star Thunder, Starfire, and Star Snow did when you were playing Stargo. Well, they did a good job, didn't they? Congratulations. After replaying all the pictures about what the three sisters did in the last 3 days, Mai was proud of her subordinates. It's over. It's all over. Yunshi hid his head in his arms. At this moment, he only wished that he had the supreme power to cut off the river of time, wiping out the whole of the last 3 days from the river of time. In front of him, Red Lotus was still sleeping, while White Lotus squinted her eyes, staring at him with a strange smile. Besides him, close to his hands, Red Lotus' beautiful, flawless body was slightly trembling as if she was in a sweet dream. Don't worry, sister, White Lotus will always be with you. You are the best sister in the world, I love you. Looking at the scene in front of him, Yunshi could find no way to deceive himself that it was just a dream. Everything was real. In the last 3 days, he had really made so many mistakes. Oh, my dream to be an upright gentleman. This day, Yunshi abandoned himself to despair. It's over. My life is all over. While Yunshi watched the pictures of the first day, he still held great hope. Until Star Thunder went the wrong way to the secret garden of the Starwing Knights, and met Lulu there. Lulu became the first victim. Then Ling Ling and Mai Lan were also added to the victim list. The next day, Starfire took over his body and was soon caught by Hua Yu. Apparently, as the leader of the Starwing Knights, Hua Yu noticed that Mai, Starfire, was in a strange mood. Looking at this scene, an emotion called hope emerged again in Yunshi's heart. Hua Yu was a perfect knight, and her strength was enough for her to protect herself. Under her protection, there should be nothing happening. Unfortunately, Yunshi still guessed wrong. It was true that Hua Yu had the strength to stop Mai, but she did nothing. Instead, she became the 4th person on the victim list. The symptoms of my poisoning was still spreading. On the 3rd day, when Yunshi fought against Norn the god of wisdom and Orphina the ruby dragon on the chessboard, Star Snow possessed his body. Unlike Star Thunder and Starfire, Star Snow avoided contact with any people from the beginning and chose to bask in the sun in the Witch Palace. In theory, she would never meet any of the members of the Starwing Knights there. Well, that was right. She didn't meet any of the members of the Starwing Knights, but the twin witches lived there. Next, Yunshi could only watch the pictures that Star Snow was brought into the underground of the Witch Palace and performed the mysterious sacrificial ceremony with the twin witches. After everything was done, Star Snow had a chance to escape from here, but unfortunately, she lost her way. Yunshi didn't want to remember what happened next. Anyway, when he opened his eyes, he was already on the big bed of the twin witches, being watched by White Lotus. What a big crisis. There's no way back. There's no chance to argue. But it wasn't my fault. How could I know what happened in the real world when I was playing Star Go on the starry sky chessboard? Sorry. I really am not. Yunshi looked at White Lotus with tears in his eyes. From the twin witch's point of view, he was undoubtedly an intruder, a pervert. My prince, is the closed mouth Zen over? White Lotus squinted her eyes and smiled at Yunshi, enjoying his dumbstruck look. You know Yunshi shivered all over. Apart from Hua Hua, there should be no one knowing his real identity in the White Lotus Sword Palace. If anyone knew that he was a man who lurked in the girls' dorm, he would be wanted by the whole of the White Lotus Sword Palace. Yes, because of this thing, I knew it from the beginning. White Lotus glanced at the star and moon ring on her hand with a gentle look. Why did she give up inheriting any of the god weapons of the Witch Palace and choose the star and moon ring to be her weapon? The reason was simple: fetters. She wanted it to be a fetter that could connect her with her prince forever. No matter what the prince became, she could find him at a glance. Even if there were 100 billion people, he was the only one she could see in her eyes. She wanted nobody but the prince. This ring is. Yunshi looked at the ring in confusion. He didn't understand what it was. Did it have any relationship with me? Is it a god weapon that can trace back time? So she can see through my real body at a glance? Are the twin witches of fate so powerful? Can they actually use such a strong god weapon? This is the gift from you, my prince. Don't you remember the first gift you gave me? White Lotus gently touched the star and moon ring, which was connected with her blood. She had signed a blood contract with it. Once the star and moon ring was broken, she would die with it. This was the way princesses expressed their trust in their lovers in ancient times. Ignoring the limitation of materials, turning impossibility into possibility. Only a talented god witch like her could master this power. After pouring her life and soul into the ring, it was finally forged. Ha! Yunshi was surprised. It was a gift from me. Why don't I remember it? Even if it didn't contain any special abilities, judging from its gorgeous appearance, it was undoubtedly a priceless treasure. Speaking of the gift I gave White Lotus, wasn't it just a Micalex I found from the hot spring? How could the star and moon ring on White Lotus' hand be the same thing as the Micalex? My prince, don't doubt it. This is your gift, the most beautiful treasure in the world. White Lotus's voice was sweet and warm, like delicious honey. Initially, it was just a Micalex. I presented my blood and soul, and made it what it is. What it means is that the sun, the moon, and the stars will never be separated. Therefore, I named it the Star and Moon Ring. Yunshi looked at White Lotus in surprise, and finally remembered what she had said when he gave her the Micalex as a gift. Today, this Micalex is just a common stone in the eyes of other people. But from now on, it's the first gift my lover gave me. In the future, it will be the gift my husband first presented to me, and gradually will become a priceless and irreplaceable treasure in my life. I don't mind other people's ideas, but for me, it's the most beautiful and glitzy gem from my prince. I witness it here. Your present is the most valuable gift to me, to complete our eternal contract. Maybe I indeed don't know what true love is, but I swear to this gem. I will love you forever. So, it wasn't just a girl's fantasy, but her vow. She really turned that Micalex into her irreplaceable treasure, the most beautiful and dazzling gemstone in the world. Red Lotus frowned in her dream as her skin flushed red. It seemed that she was about to wake up. Too bad. Yunshi looked at Red Lotus' naked body, sweating heavily. If Red Lotus woke up at this moment, he wouldn't be able to purge himself of suspicion. Fortunately, Yunshi's most powerful ally in the Witch Palace was beside him. Sister, 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. White Lotus approached her sister's ear and began counting sheep in a gentle voice. If it was anyone else, this trick was undoubtedly ineffective, but for Red Lotus, only when White Lotus played this trick, Red Lotus would fall asleep again. White Lotus. BAA. Hearing her cute sister's voice, Red Lotus contentedly turned over on the bed, putting her left hand on White Lotus' right hand and slept more soundly. Looking at Red Lotus, who fell into sleep again, Yunshi didn't even dare to breathe. But, because Red Lotus turned her back to Yunshi, He could clearly see her naked, snow-white back, which was even more attractive than when she was facing Yunxi. 99 Sheep. White Lotus showed an expression of reassurance on her face while smoothly covering her sister with a sheet, and then smiled at Yunxi, whose face had totally turned red. My prince, is my sister's body pretty? This. Well, Yunxi's forehead was covered with sweat. Answer pretty meant that he has seen their bodies all over when they were sleeping. Apparently, this was a death penalty if he dared to say it. Answer not pretty was like plugging one's ears while stealing a bell, which it was impossible to deceive White Lotus. Whichever answer was wrong. Accurately speaking, since the moment he entered the twin witch's bedroom, he was already a sinner. At this time, as a person who had committed a crime of offending the twin witches, what kind of expression should he put on his face? Probably when the condemned criminals were sent under guard to the gallows, they held the same mood in their hearts. Sister hates men very, very, very much. Therefore, my prince, you have to be careful. Never expose your true identity in front of my sister. To Yunxi, White Lotus' voice was like a light of redemption in the darkness. Does it mean that she will not reveal my true identity to others? Of course, I will keep it a secret for you, my prince. A good woman should be devoted to supporting her lover. Isn't it a natural thing? White Lotus squinted at Yunxi and betrayed her sister without hesitation. Her happiness was her sister's happiness. The twin witches were inseparable, they were two souls of one fate. Their relationship was closer than any twins in the world. They were destined to live together forever. Therefore, her prince would also become her sister's prince. Red Lotus and White Lotus would not be separated. She had found her happiness, therefore, she hoped that her sister could get happiness too. Yunxi breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that at least, White Lotus was on his side. The real problem was her sister, Red Lotus. He didn't even dare to imagine how angry Red Lotus would be if she knew the truth. Why do you like me? After feeling relaxed, more doubts emerged in Yunxi's heart. He had had very few contacts with Red Lotus and White Lotus. The closest contact was the moment when White Lotus played the role of Sleeping Beauty in the dark forest. Looking back on that kiss, Yunxi couldn't say for sure that whether it was Red Lotus or White Lotus he kissed in the trial world. However, the taste of the soft and fragrant lips still lingered in his mind. And because of that kiss, his fate was totally changed and he had to step on a road that had no return. The prince is the prince. I've been waiting for you to show up for a long time. Like the sleeping princess in the dark forest, waiting for the prince's kiss to lift the curse. My sister and I have been waiting for our prince for too long a time. White Lotus' eyes gradually become sad. My prince, don't you like us? Now that you have woken us up from the dark forest, please expose your love to us. Just as flowers need sunshine, we also need your love to grow well and become the only flower in the world to blossom for you. Yunxi looked at White Lotus' eyes and had a feeling of guilt in his heart. It's different from what you said, the great stars. Why didn't she forget the experience in the trial world? Why is she so persistent and even fanatical? Wasn't it just a dream? Prince, do you think dreams are just dreams? White Lotus saw through the confusion in Yunxi's heart at a glance and shook her head. Her prince, indeed, did not understand. Dream is the manifestation of a human's deepest consciousness, it's the most essential part of the human mind. Why did they become cursed princesses, sleeping in the dark forest in the dream? Because that was what they really looked like. The twin witches of fate were also the cursed twin witches. They could never enjoy the same simple life like any ordinary people in the universe. If they hadn't been recognized as the god witches, they would be monsters in the eyes of the public. They had the great talent that could make countless people envy. Also, they were carrying the equivalent curse on their back. Amongst other witches, there were also people who said that they were monsters that should never exist. My sister didn't say anything, but she kept on practicing desperately, trying to get beyond everything. Just like Cassina the battle god, who is strong enough to ignore all gossips. Like a red lotus blooming in hell, my sister has already embarked on a road of no return. And I have also made the same choice, practicing the forbidden skill, the great circulation. From this point of view, they deserved to be the twin witches. They had the same stubbornness in their hearts, and they both wanted to fight against their cursed fate. Prince, no matter how many times, I will repeat the same oath. I love you, and this is definitely not a joke. To us, you are the sun and hope. You're my prince. I won't look at any other man except you. Maybe I don't know anything about love, but I swear that I will do everything I can to love you and never stop until I die. Yunshi was completely speechless. It was not his fault. He was just a fake prince. However, the twin witches were even more exalted than any princess in the mortal world. It was just a chance encounter in the trial world. Why did it lead to this? Great stars, can you tell me how to deal with this kind of thing? Isn't it easy, master? That's where the goal is. Maya's voice quietly appeared in Yunshi's ears, as if she was saying a thing that was as natural as why climb the mountain. Because it's there. I can't deal with the twin witches. It's too dangerous to get in touch with them. Yunshi shook his head. In his heart, he was still surprised by the truth that White Lotus fell in love with him at first sight. Hua once told him how dangerous the twin witches were. Little she, the most dangerous people in the White Lotus Sword domain is not the White Lotus Sword Master, but the twin witches. If they cooperate with each together, I'm not sure if I can beat them down. Probably in the whole of the White Lotus Sword domain, they are the strongest under the legend rank. This was the first time for Yunshi hearing that Hua was praising someone. It was hard to imagine that even Hua would praise the twin witches, which was full evidence that the twin witches were far stronger than their appearances. If their enemies regarded them as common hero-ranked witches, they would definitely regret their ignorance. After really touching the realm of the hero rank, Yunshi realized what a powerful ability flying was. The twin witches could fly in the sky when they were together, which was a super strong ability that most hero-ranked beings dreamed of. Judging from Yunshi's current power, even Red Lotus could kill him alone, not to mention to fight against the twin witches together. Even if White Lotus really liked him and wouldn't do anything, Red Lotus was still a strong enemy. Master, you have defeated a lot of legend-ranked beings on the Starry Sky chessboard. Why are you still afraid of the twin witches? They are just at the hero rank. Maya felt confused. I thought that the Starry Sky chessboard was just a game. After recalling his achievement on the Starry Sky chessboard, even Yunshi himself was dumbfounded. It was a truth that he had defeated a lot of legend-ranked beings in the game. However, he was in the real world now. It wasn't even possible for him to sit as equals at the same table with any legend-ranked people in the real world. Now, although he was already a hero-ranked baker now, his combat power hadn't reached the hero rank. After all, it was impossible to defeat any person by holding a loaf of bread in his hand. Prince, it's time. Please go out and wait for us outside. Looking at Yunshi's face, White Lotus realized that her prince hadn't really understood her love. Never mind, love can't be proved by speaking. She would use her actions to make the prince understand that her love for him was definitely not just saying so. At dawn, Yunshi snuck out of the twin witch's bedroom. Oh, precious fresh air. Smelling the fresh air, Yunshi was relieved and even wanted to shout in the witch palace, "Love is dear, freedom is dearer." It was too dangerous to stay with the twin witches on the bed. If Red Lotus woke up, he would definitely be killed. Master, why are you so afraid of the twin witches? Speaking of danger, your childhood sweetheart, Hua is apparently more dangerous. Maya didn't understand Yunshi's fear. Maya, Hua is different from Red Lotus and White Lotus. If Hua gets angry, I can soothe her with bread. Her anger comes and goes quickly. As long as I stay with her, her anger will soon disappear. Yunshi had had rich experience dealing with his childhood sweetheart. No matter how angry Hua was, he was confident that he could comfort her. But Red Lotus was different. She would definitely draw out her sword if she found anything strange. Yunshi never wanted to provoke such an enemy in his life. If Red Lotus knew my real identity, she wouldn't stop chasing me before I'm torn to pieces. She is totally different from White Lotus. Maya thought for a while and drew a conclusion, that is to say, putting Red Lotus aside, that you like White Lotus, don't you? Yunshi didn't say a word. If it was only White Lotus one person, the cute, sweet girl who regarded him as her prince, would he fall in love with her? It wasn't difficult to figure out the answer, however, She couldn't say it out loud. Because that was impossible. Red Lotus and White Lotus were the twins of fate that could never be separated. The invisible thread wrapped around their hands had forever connected their destiny together. Eating, drinking, sleeping, fighting, even falling in love, getting married, they couldn't leave each other. Curse. Is that what White Lotus tried to tell me? She seemed to understand why White Lotus would look at him with longing. Perhaps what she had been waiting for was just a person who could accept her and Red Lotus and treat them like princesses. Prince. But I'm not the prince you imagined, she sighed. They were real princesses. However, he wasn't a prince, he was the star child who may run away at any time. Once his true identity is revealed, his 4 terrifying ex-girlfriends would not let him keep enjoying his peaceful life. Moreover, he still remembered that the twin witches were also candidate apostles of one of his ex-girlfriend. It was equal to looking for his own death if he dared to fall in love with them. This was probably the saddest thing in the world. The encounter between him and them was doomed to be a tragedy. It was clear that the relationship between them was prey and hunters. How did it get this far along? Great stars, tell me, why did you let them become the sleeping beauty in the dark forest? Why do I have a feeling that my skin is really smooth today? Red Lotus stretched herself out and looked at her sister with a pleasant look. Of course, my sister has the best skin. White Lotus squinted and smiled. Very well, I'm in a perfect condition. Let's start the second stage of the sacrificial ceremony. Affirming that she was in an unprecedented good condition, Red Lotus immediately turned her attention to the sacrificial ceremony. The sacrificial ceremony could be divided into 3 stages. The start, sacrifice. The core, invite gods. The end, send the god away. The first stage was the easiest and safest, as long as the sacrifices were appropriate. There was almost no record of failure in the first stage. The second stage was the most important. It determined what kind of gods would respond to the ceremony. It could be said that the success of the sacrificial ceremony depended on the second stage. No one would dare to say with certainty that the being that responded to the ceremony was a friendly god or an uncontrollable monster, because the gods and fantastic creatures who would notice the ceremony were random. The success or failure of the second stage also determined the outcome of the third stage. It was easy to summon a god, but would be extremely difficult to send the god away. If they summoned a distorted monster, to accomplish the third stage would become an impossible task. Most of the deaths in the sacrificial ceremonies occurred in the second stage and the third stages. Boom. Boom. Under the waterfall, the twin sisters prayed together in the morning, adjusting their bodies and minds for the most perfect state. Suddenly, Red Lotus realized something was wrong. No, it wasn't something bad, but something so good that made her feel incredible. Her synchronization rate with the Red Lotus Holy Sword was increasing strikingly. 50%, 51%, 52%, 53%. Usually, it would take her a month to increase 1% or 2% synchronization rate with the Red Lotus Holy Sword, but now, under the waterfall, she could clearly feel that the connection between the Red Lotus Holy Sword and herself was becoming closer and closer. As if something lurking in her body had been released, her body naturally emitted the same aura as the Red Lotus Holy Sword. There were even golden sparks flying out from the Red Lotus Holy Sword, floating around her body. It's strange, what's going on today? Red Lotus gazed at the Red Lotus Holy Sword in confusion. Every inch of her skin emitted scorching temperatures, but none of the heat had spilled out. From her soul to her body, she was immersed in a sense of extreme excitement, like a flaming fire, releasing her unbridled joy. White Lotus, I seem to have had an epiphany. Red Lotus smiled, opening her eyes wide in surprise. She didn't expect that the so-called epiphany in Buddhism would happen to herself. Sister, your body is enlightened. White Lotus naturally knew what had happened to her sister and began to regret it. If she had known it earlier, she would have changed her position on the bed last night. It must be because of my prince. If he took off my clothes last night instead of my sister's, I would be the one whose body was enlightened today. Yes, that's the so-called epiphany, enlightenment. Naturally, Red Lotus knew nothing about what had happened to her last night. She only felt that her heart was beating violently, her chest and her whole body were burning as if they had turned into flames. This feeling is too wonderful. I want to be stronger. Red Lotus looked up and announced, for White Lotus, I want to be as strong as Cassina the battle god. Sister, what if I say that you can become stronger if you fell in love with the prince? White Lotus squinted, asking in a casual tone. The prince? That jerk. Remembering the prince who kissed her sister in the dream and ran away after that, Red Lotus bristled with anger in an instant. This joke is not funny at all. If it's true, I'd cut him into pieces right away, pieces that can be used to feed fish. Red Lotus raised her sword and said the sentence again. The prince must die. A pair of dark red flame wings extended from behind Red Lotus, the sparks on Red Lotus' sword flew up, and eventually gathered together and turned into a huge column of light, evaporating the huge waterfall instantly. For 10 seconds, not even a drop of water fell down from the waterfall. Red Lotus' sword cut off the water flow of the whole waterfall and created a deep red torrent of flame above the waterfall, which looked as if a volcano just erupted. There is still a long way to go. Looking at her sister's angry appearance and the flaming wings behind her, White Lotus felt that she still had to keep the thing last night a secret. My prince is probably no match of my sister now, and even I can't stop my sister if she went crazy. Nevertheless, it doesn't matter. My sister's body is still very honest. As I guessed, her body will never refuse my prince. For us, my prince is special, because he represents the glory of hope. Because my sister was close to the light of hope last night, she could become stronger today. Sooner or later, my sister will understand. So, wait a little longer, my prince. My sister and I will come to you and become your wings. Yawn. She suddenly shivered and sneezed on the roof of the witch palace. It's cold. Although it was a perfectly sunny day, she still felt as if he was a lost person wandering in the fog, unable to find the way forward. Master, you don't need to be afraid. After all, you have had so many girlfriends, it doesn't matter if you have more. Just like stepping on boats, if you stepped on 2 boats, you may fall into the water. However, if there are countless boats that have been strung together by countless steel wires, you can walk on the boats as though walking upon the flat ground. Maya encouraged her master. After all, it was a great mission entrusted to her by the stars. Who said it? She always thought Maya's words were unreliable. Balance in all things, said Maya with a mysterious smile. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. This was your favorite quotation in your past life, master. Actually, I shouldn't have come here. Looking at the altar of deity, she sighed. To be honest, he had an ominous presentiment and really wanted to leave as soon as possible. Unfortunately, once the sacrificial ceremony started, it could never be stopped, otherwise, the witches would be cursed. That was the reason why he didn't run away from the witch palace after he had actually gained his freedom again. White Lotus' gentle eyes were firmer than any shackles, locking Yunshi's heart tightly. She believed that her prince would never leave before they successfully accomplished the sacrificial ceremony. She was right. Yunshi wouldn't look at Red Lotus and White Lotus being cursed because of him, so he had to stay and wait for the coming of the evening. At dusk, it was the critical point between day and night, the time that devils and evils appeared, and the time that humans and gods could meet. In ancient times, witches called this time Devil's Time. The sacrifice in the first stage was to open a virtual door of dusk, so that the gods could pass through and descend into the real world from the void. On the silent altar of deity, Yunshi held Red Lotus' hand in his left hand and White Lotus' hand in his right hand, and because the twin witches were born inseparable, they also held each other's hands. They sat in a circle in the middle of the altar of deity, waiting for the arrival of dusk. As time went by, White Lotus became slightly surprised and uneasy, because she didn't see any sign that the first stage of the ceremony had been accomplished. None of the gods or fantastic creatures in the void appeared in front of the other side of the door of dusk, which was about to open. Is there something wrong? According to her experience, she should be able to vaguely feel the aura of the god on the other side of the door of dusk now. However, There was nothing standing on the other side of the door. Red Lotus also felt confused, but her confusion wasn't related to the sacrificial ceremony. She just felt that her sister, White Lotus palm, was becoming hotter than usual. No, not only her sister, it seemed that her own palm was also becoming hotter and hotter. It seemed that the circle formed by the three people formed a strange aura field, which combined the three people's auras together. There was something that was happening in the circle. The three people's breathing and heartbeats were synchronizing. Aura resonance. Is it because of my prince? White Lotus guessed. Unlike her sister, she knew what it meant. On the contrary, Yunshi still knew nothing about what was happening. In fact, from the very beginning, he had had an uneasy feeling and always felt that something was wrong in the sacrificial ceremony. In fact, he guessed right. A great war was taking place in the void above the White Lotus sword domain. I am an ancient god, a Sunwalker, Hura Azda. My soldiers, obey my orders and fight for me. The Sunwalker with a dog-headed mask on his face raised the scepter in his hand. In the blink of an eye, millions of sand soldiers came out of the void and marched toward the battlefield in an orderly line. Their opponent was an immortal bird flying in the sky, whose existence itself was already a disaster to the world. Just a few sparks on her beautiful tail feathers fell to the ground, and this had ignited and burned hundreds of sand soldiers into ashes. Phoenix, the immortal bird, the fantastic creature who represented for immortality. Hura Azda, the Sunwalker, the king of the desert, and the god of billions of mortals. They were the first couple who noticed the sacrifice offered by the twin witches, and the first couple who fought for it. I saw it first, I saw it first. Phoenix swooped and spat out a deep red fireball from her mouth, bombarding Hura Azda's sand soldier army. Boom! Over 100,000 sand soldiers were totally evaporated under Phoenix's attack. As a mushroom cloud rose to the sky, a large part of the sand soldier army was eliminated in an instant. Phoenix, the sacrifice is mine. As a rare Sunwalker, the king of desert, and an ancient god, Hura Azda seldom responded to any prayer or call from humans. The reason was simple, because humans couldn't offer him any sacrifices that could let him feel interested in. Even a top-level fire-type ruby couldn't get him to take a glance at it. As a Sunwalker, he was a natural destroyer. No matter where he went, endless flamestorms would naturally emerge and swallow the world. And during the process, countless gemstones would naturally form and condense. To put it bluntly, all Sunwalkers were a king with endless wealth. They could make the top-level magic gemstones themselves. Moreover, they were also the strongest beings in the endless gods' domains. Common gemstones were meaningless to them, only the stones that contained a god's power, for example, a cryolite, could draw their attention. However, a cryolite could only slightly draw their attention, but none of them would respond to a call just for a cryolite. If the summoner didn't offer up hundreds of cryolites, it wasn't possible to summon a Sunwalker. However, it was different this time. When the twin witches started the sacrificial ceremony, Hura Azda instantly noticed the sacrifice and realized how valuable it was. At a great cost, he passed through countless worlds and finally arrived at this place on time. It was hard to describe the strong temptation of the sacrifice was for him. After becoming a Sunwalker, he had almost forgotten the feeling of palpitating with excitement. How long has it been since the last time I had this feeling? I want it. I want it. Even if I have to sacrifice millions of my subordinates, I must obtain it. At the moment he arrived here, he instantly noticed Phoenix, who just reached this same place a moment ago. Without hesitation, he immediately closed the space passage and enclosed this area in the void using his god power, forcing Phoenix to fight with him before she could access the Door of Dus. Hereby, the war between a god and a fantastic creature began. This was a war of gods. Whether it was Phoenix or Hura, the time of their lives was far longer than the history of the endless gods' domains. Even the aftermath of their battle was enough to destroy all of the White Lotus sword domain. Above the battlefield, an ice-blue figure was staring coldly at the duel between the god and the fantastic creature. She was the ruler, the witness, and the guardian of the Sky Sword god's domain. Her presence represented that the duel between them had been recognized by the Sky Sword god's domain, and was under surveillance of them. Millions of sand soldiers raised the strange weapons in their hands and sang the praises of their god, the guardian of their race, the great king of the desert, the god of the sun, Hura-Azda. When the soldiers were still alive, the first sentence they heard when they opened their eyes was Hura bless me, and then they were baptized by the priests and became a believer of the sun god. From birth to death, they listened to the voices of the priests and fought steadfastly for their god. After death, they would come to the sun god and become his immortal sand soldiers. The more devout they were, the stronger sand soldier they could transfer into after their death. Those who do good get a reward for good, those who do evil get a reward for evil. After good people died, beautiful girls would descend and lead them to heaven. However, if they were evil people, female ghosts would drag them into hell and let them suffer in perdition forever. The soldiers Hura needed would be selected from the judge's bridge, and Hura would grant them undead bodies and let them become members of his sand soldier army. The more sand soldiers Hura summoned, the stronger he would become. Usually, his sand soldier army was strong enough to sweep away millions of enemy troops alone, therefore, Hura hadn't had any fight with any beings for a very, very long time. However, his opponent this time was Phoenix, a fantastic creature whose identity wasn't inferior to him. She held not only the rule of fire, but also the concept of eternity. All attacks were meaningless to Phoenix, because she was an immortal bird who wouldn't die. Phoenix was the only fantastic creatures known in the endless gods' domains that couldn't be killed by any methods. Her existence itself stood for eternity. Her regenerative capacity was much stronger than Hydra, who had 9 heads and 9 lives. Even though Hura was a Sunwalker, it felt tricky when facing such an opponent who couldn't be killed. During the war that had lasted for more than 10 hours, he had successfully hit Phoenix's heart, head, and body more than once. Phoenix's whole body had even been crushed by his golden scepter, however, she could always recover herself in a flash as if nothing had happened. Witness the sin of the sun. As the evening approached, Hura-Azda finally decided to get rid of Phoenix. The sun disk, appear for me. The golden scepter was inserted into the desert under Hura's feet, and there, countless fireballs began appearing in the sky. A golden fireball appeared in the middle of the sky, and with countless black spots flying in the fireball. After it appeared on the battlefield, the temperature around it began to rise at a terrible rate. It was a god weapon, the sun disk. It wasn't a common god weapon that could be obtained by a common hero-ranked humans, but a weapon that really belonged to a god. All over the sky, unnatural fire clouds appeared in an unnatural way. One cloud after another gathered together and flew to him from 10 miles, 100 miles, or even thousands of miles away. The original bright sunshine became dim again, and the grey clouds fell heavily to the ground as if they were going to crush the earth. Rotating, it seemed as if there was an invisible mixer in the sky. All clouds in the sky started rotating at an incredible speed, which looked as if a huge flame furnace was being ignited. In fact, that was what was happening. The sun disk was a miniature incarnation of the sun, which was also named SN Drive in some gods' domains. SN Drive, Sun Nucleus Drive, I'm not afraid. Because she knew that she wouldn't die, Phoenix always chose the same tactic in battle. Whoever her opponent was, she just needed to rush up and beat them down. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Rest in peace. Hura closed his eyes. There were gold-red fragments flying around his fingertips, which looked surprisingly similar to the cryolite sacrificed by the twin witches. All of a sudden, a brighter figure appeared in the middle of the sky. His body was brighter than the sun, emitted golden lights and illuminated the entire world. When this figure appeared, a strong aura spread and announced his dignity to all beings in the world. All the sand soldiers knelt down and presented their highest respect to the great existence in the sky. It was Hura-Azda's real body, the Sunwalker, a real supreme sun god. When he opened his eyes, there were countless golden lights shining out of his eyes. His hair was as bright as the real sun. In a flash, it looked as if there were countless hot suns emerging out in the sky. He held a small, golden sun disk in his hand, aiming at Phoenix with no emotion in his eyes. Only the black particles that were constantly emanating from the sun disk in his hand announced what an ominous thing this god weapon was at the moment. It's an astronomical phenomenon called sunspot. A sunspot was powerful enough to destroy a planet completely. At this moment, the number of sunspots twining around the sun disk had already exceeded 3,000. Compressing a sunspot into a black particle, it was already a power that was beyond all hero-ranked beings' imagination. This was the ability of a legendary god, the power of the Sunwalker. Rest in peace, Phoenix. Hura shook his head at Phoenix, who was rushing at him, throwing the sun disk lightly towards her. The golden sun disk turned into a magnificent golden track, cut through Phoenix's body and lighted her feathers. Instantly, countless sunspots exploded and annihilated Phoenix's body, destroying the entire battlefield. Continuous explosions of sunspots almost decomposed and annihilated everything in the void. Endless solar storms swept through the entire space. The end of the world. The power of the sun disk could only be described in this way. That was the power of the Sunwalker. The sun disk rotated, flew back into Hura's hands and shrank rapidly, disappearing together with Hura's real body in the sky. As for Phoenix, her body had been completely annihilated. Her, the only survivor, Hura's projection breathed a sigh of relief. In order to defeat Phoenix, he really spent a great amount of his god power. Summoning the sun disk from the distant western god's domain, struck a blow that could even destroy an entire world and restrained its power within the range of the battlefield. It was too risky, as if he was performing on the tightrope. However, holding the sacrifice, the golden red gem in his hand, Hura laughed happily. It's worth it. Everything's worth it. Even though he still didn't know what the golden red gem was, just holding it in his hands, his heart had been somehow quieted down. To Sunwalkers, the most difficult thing was not to obtain stronger power but to control the power they had obtained. The Sunwalkers who couldn't control their own power couldn't descend into the mortal world, because their bodies were enveloped in endless solar storms, which would burn all living beings on the earth to ashes. The treasures that were effective for Sunwalker was extremely rare, and the unknown golden red gem in Hura's hand was undoubtedly one of the rarest treasures that could be used by Sunwalkers. Hura was very satisfied with the sacrifice and decided to offer the twin witches a true god's blessing. He went to the Door of Dusk and started to communicate with the twin witches on the altar of deity. We succeeded. A god is coming. White Lotus opened her eyes. From the other side of the Door of Dusk, an unusually hot breath was spreading to this space. The burning power partly broke through the unopened door, making the temperature around the altar to rise significantly. There was no doubt that their sacrifice attracted a very powerful existence attention. However, they still didn't know whether it was a kind god or an evil monster. The only thing they knew was that this god or monster was far stronger than the fire-type fantastic creature they summoned the last time. The next stage was the most important part of the sacrificial ceremony. They must determine whether the strong existence on the other side of the door was good or evil. Before they opened the Door of Dusk, they could ask the god 3 questions, and the 3 questions were the core of the sacrificial ceremony. If it was an evil monster and they didn't find its true identity, they may pay the price with their lives. The god they summoned could choose to answer the questions or remain silent, and the witches would deduce who the god was from the god's attitude. Generally, it wasn't a big problem, because witches had had rich experience in how to ask the 3 questions. They even had the safest template in theory. Great God, where did you come from? In the face of a god, White Lotus great circulation would be useless, because it wouldn't be able to predict anything about a god. Therefore, the first thing she asked was the question most commonly asked by witches. I'm from the end of the western desert, above the earth where the pyramids stand. I am the Lord of the Sky, the embodiment of order and truth, the infinite light. After killing Phoenix, well, at least, killing her temporarily, Hura was in a very good mood and declared his identity frankly. Gee! White Lotus covered her little mouth with a look of total disbelief. How could this be true? Although his name did exist on the witches' list of kind gods, however, he never responded to any witch's call before. On the list, he was one of the top 5 gods the witches were able to summon. He was a real ancient god. The Lord of the Sky, the sun god, Hura Azda. He was one of the oldest gods. Before the endless gods' domains were connected together, he was already the master of hundreds of gods' domains. In theory, if a witch wanted to summon him, the witch must prepare hundreds of fire-type cryolites. Only in this situation, The strong sun god may pay attention to the sacrificial ceremony. In the rules of the sacrificial ceremony, the summoned gods or monsters could choose to keep silent and ignore the 3 questions. However, if they answered the questions, they must tell the truth. Hura Azda had no intention of hiding his identity, therefore, the other 2 questions White Lotus prepared had become meaningless. Well, are you satisfied with the sacrifice? Looking at her sister, who was in a trance, Red Lotus quickly asked the second question. In the normal process, the question would be what are you? However, Hura Azda had directly declared his identity. This question was meaningless now. I'm very satisfied. I will give you a wonderful blessing from a real god. Holding the golden red gem in his hand, Hura Azda promised in a pleasant mood. Everything went smoothly. Yunshi was relieved. It seemed that this was a very kind and talkative god. Well, in this case, can I also ask a question? Great god, what is love? Then, Yunshi regretted his impertinent question many years. Oh, love. Hura Azda was in a very good mood today, and he felt that Yunshi's voice was pleasing, therefore, he didn't mind giving this lost sheep his advice. You should love the people you like. Love is selfless, free, and should not be bound by any rules. If you love your child, you should marry her. You can marry your daughter, your elder sister and your little sister. I bless all beings who have love in their hearts. If you love her, you shouldn't mind her race or identity. If you love her, you should marry her immediately. You need to protect her and let her become the happiest bride in the world. You should dress her in the most beautiful bridal dress with your hands and tell her that she belongs to you. Ha! Yunshi felt that his world outlook was totally subverted. Is this what love is in the eyes of a legend-ranked god? What the hell are you asking? Red Lotus looked at Yunshi with discontent. The sacrificial ceremony must be dealt with carefully, any error would make them pay a heavy price. At any rate, I shouldn't ask the last question. It's totally irrelevant to the god. What a layman she is. Sorry. I suddenly wanted to know what love is in the eyes of a god. Yunshi lowered his head embarrassed and apologized sincerely. However, the answer from this god had been unconsciously impressed in his heart. So, is this what love is to a god? Please come through the door, great god. White Lotus was also satisfied with the sun god's answer. No witches would refuse to accept the blessing of the ancient sun god. If the noble families knew that it would be the sun god who responded to the sacrificial ceremony, they would be willing to pay any price for assisting at this ceremony. However, White Lotus wouldn't let any noble come and hold her hands in the sacrificial ceremony. Only her sister and the prince could hold her hands. Open the door of dusk. After asking the 3 questions, the most critical moment was coming. In the evening twilight, the door connected the mortal world and the god's world was slowly opening. A golden light shone through the half-opened door, shining on the twin witches and Yunshi's bodies. At the end of the western desert, above the earth where the pyramids stood, the Lord of the Sky, the incarnation of order and truth, the infinite light, the sun god, Hura Azda's figure was visible through the door. It was a god with a golden scepter in his hand and a dog-headed mask on his face. Just looking at his figure, Yunshi felt as if he was staring at a shining and brilliant sun. Sun god. Hura Azda, reading the god's real name out, White Lotus blushed and was a little excited. Although she was known as a genius who had mastered the great circulation, she never thought that she could successfully summon the legendary sun god one day. This was an ancient god who had participated in the twilight of the gods and survived. He was the incarnation of the sun, walking on the earth in the form of the Sunwalker. Among all gods in the endless gods' domains, he was one of the strongest gods, the sun god of the Persian gods' domain, the strongest god, the Sunwalker. Red Lotus was not good at holding the ceremony, however, she also knew what the sun god stood for. In any myth or legend, the sun symbolized the origin of life and was worshipped and praised by countless people. As long as it was a place where intelligent beings lived, there was the legend of sun gods. However, there were only a few gods in the endless gods' domains who were really a veritable sun god. To be the god of the sun, they needed to have the ability to transform into a real sun. Accurately speaking, All sun gods were also sunwalkers, the real legends walking amongst the infinite stars. Hura-Azda was the strongest and the most famous one amongst all sunwalkers. The cost of summoning such a god was unthinkable. Did my sister just accomplish an extraordinary feat? What's that golden-red cryolite? Is it really so special? Witches, I am very satisfied with your sacrifices. Prepare to receive the blessings of the sun god. The sun god's voice was tremendous. Even though he had not yet stepped across the door of dusk, his god power had begun to shine in the room. He's really a kind god. Yunshi also saw the sun god's figure through the door, however, compared to the dazzling golden scepter in his hand and the mysterious dog-headed mask on his face, he paid more attention to the bracelet on the god's wrist. Incredibly, when Yunshi saw the golden bracelet on Hura's wrist, he had a strange feeling as if he had seen the same bracelet somewhere in the past. From the golden lines on the bracelet, he felt as if he was looking at the record of the memory of the stars. The door opened. Hura-Azda held the golden scepter in his hand and was going to step directly into the door from the void. No. I came first, I was the first, I found it earlier than you. I will never let you obtain it. After a sharp, high-pitched sound, endless wings surrounded the sun god, who was about to enter the door of dusk, and finally formed a pair of crimson wings. Phoenix was back. Impossible. Have you not been annihilated? Hura-Azda looked at the crimson wings in astonishment. The next moment, Phoenix's wings forcibly pulled up the sun god's body, flying madly into the sky. This wasn't a common attack but a suicide attack. Phoenix didn't snatch the golden-red gem in Hura's hand, but carried the sun god's body, crashing into the dome of the battlefield. You're crazy. Aware of what Phoenix was going to do, Hura-Azda's voice became flustered and shrill. He brandished the golden scepter in his hand and summoned 1,000,000 sand soldiers again. He was going to use the sun disk again. Unfortunately, Phoenix had learned a lesson before and would never give him another chance. Boom! With a sound, Phoenix's wings carried Hura-Azda's body and the golden-red gem, brutally crashing into the dome of the battlefield. The sky was broken. A big hole appeared on the dome of the closed battlefield. The aura of the sacrifice, which was enclosed in the battlefield created by Hura-Azda's god power before, now was totally exposed in the void. In the next second, more than 10 legend-ranked wills had locked on this area from all directions. Chapter 509, Angry Sun God, 1, Closure. Hura-Azda, the desperate sun god, waved the golden scepter in his hand and repaired the big hole smashed through by Phoenix. The guardian of the gate, Lilibet Elizabeth, had also moved. Her azure god sword drew a mysterious arc in the air, an ice-blue halo spread out in a circle, directly expanding the area of the battlefield created by Hura's god power to 10 times. But this time, it wasn't just a battle between Phoenix and Hura-Azda. A total of 10 supernatural, godlike beings were attracted by the sacrifice, descending into this area in different ways. 7 of them were in human forms, but they all hid their true faces using different methods. Nobody knew whether they were real gods under their human figures. Their human appearances should just be their projections. Occasionally, some terrible beings would also pretend to be a god in human form, deceiving the witches in the sacrificial ceremony. In addition to the 7 people, there were 2 projections of fantastic creatures. They were from the highest god's domain in the eastern god's domain, the Kunlun god's domain. They were frequent callers of witches' sacrificial ceremonies. One of them had red feathers, broad beak, standing on 1 foot. Its name was Defying, a godbird of fire. The other one was a dragon with golden scales and wings, looking around with an arrogant expression. Its name was Yinglong. Just like Defying, it was also a subordinate of the master of the Kunlun god's domain, the West Queen. Both of them were fire-type fantastic creatures. Like the 7 human-shaped projections, they arrived at this area immediately after feeling the aura of the sacrifice. Behind the 2 fantastic creatures, there was a strange egg that was floating in the void. Defying and Yinglong were looking at the egg nervously. Their eyes are very confused, as if something totally unexpected had happened. At this moment, there were 12 god-ranked beings gathered around the door of dusk for a sacrifice. Such a thing had never happened before in the history of the sacrificial ceremony. Good. Very good. Phoenix, are you satisfied? Hura-Azda looked around and ground his teeth. Just one step later, he would have the sacrifice. However, Phoenix totally ruined his plan and brought 10 new opponents to the battlefield. Essentially, the sacrificial ceremony was a contract. As long as the last step of the sacrificial ceremony had not been completed yet, even though he had held the sacrifice in his hand, the sacrifice still didn't belong to him. In history, there were indeed witches who were eaten by the fake gods they summoned. In this case, the fake gods would lose their sacrifices. Of course, the sacrifices weren't the fake gods' goals from the very beginning. They responded to witches' call just because they wanted to spread horror and chaos. Most of the time, the extraordinary existences who descended onto the altar were still satisfied with the sacrifices. The appearances of evil gods were just rare exceptions. In very few cases, there would be two gods who were interested in the same sacrifice and responded to the same sacrificial ceremony. At this time, there was basically only one way to decide who could go through the door of dusk: compare each other's god power. To put it more plainly, the two gods would have a fight and the winner could go through the door, just like what Phoenix and Hura-Azda did before. However, the sacrifice this time was too special. Both of them didn't want to give it up. Phoenix came first, but she wasn't very familiar with the sacrificial ceremony. When she hesitated, Hura-Azda had come and robbed the sacrifice. Just in case, Hura-Azda had also sealed this area in the void using his god power. At the same time, he also called the guardian of the Sky Sword god's domain to be the witness. Hura-Azda's behavior didn't deviate from the order of the Sky Sword god's domain, so therefore, Lilibet, the guardian of the Sky Sword god's domain, witnessed the duel between Phoenix and Hura and confirmed his victory. Originally, the sun god should step across the door of dusk and complete the ceremony, giving the twin witches and Yunshi his blessings. After that, he could take away the sacrifice. The problem was that Phoenix was not going to give up. Even though she had been burned to ashes by Hura-Azda's sun disk, she still strove to revive and fly back, shouting at the sun god, "It's mine. I saw it first. I got here first. Even if I can't get it, I won't let you take it away. I, Phoenix, the immortal bird. In my dictionary, there is never the word death. 4 human gods, 3 monsters, and 3 fantastic creatures. There is even an egg." Looking at the 10 enemies who were staring at the golden red gem in his hand, Hura-Azda gritted his teeth and thrust his golden scepter into the golden sand. "It seems that I will have to beat down 10 opponents today." The sun disk rotated and became bigger and bigger in his hand. In the Song of Millions of Sand Soldiers, Hura-Azda, the Sunwalker, one of the oldest ancient gods, showed his real power. Chapter 510, Angry Sun God, 2. The golden scepter represented the supreme divine power of the sun, and was also the symbol of Hura-Azda in the Persian god's domain. With this golden scepter in his hand, Hura-Azda could summon his millions of sand soldiers anywhere, driving this indestructible army to defeat all enemies who dared to violate his sanctity. As time went by, people only remembered his sand soldier army and gradually forgot how dangerous Hura-Azda himself was. He was a god, but in fact, he didn't need any believers to enhance his strength. He existed and became immortal long before he became the supreme god of the Persian god's domain. Even in the endless god's domains, he was very rare and special, because he was a Sunwalker. Even amongst all legend-ranked classes, Sunwalker was one of the most dangerous. In legend, Sunwalkers couldn't come to the mortal world, because as long as Sunwalkers opened their eyes, their bodies would emit endless light and heat. In the sight of a Sunwalker, everything would be ignited and burned to ashes. Hura looked around. The earth became a sea of lava. Countless fire spirits cheered and flew up, sang and danced around him. "Let there be light," Hura uttered, and there was light. The sky and the earth are filled with light, dispelling all darkness. Countless sword-like golden lights tore all evil existences to pieces and swept them away. In the light, darkness still existed, but it wasn't the power of night, but sunspots, which stood for the ultimate power of light and heat. At the same time, there were also countless red dots erupting, which was the phenomenon called solar flare. This was the sun, and all sunwalkers would experience the same thing when they were born. They were the people who embraced the sun, and even themselves would be transformed into a sun, shining on all things in the world. In front of the power of the sun, everything would be annihilated, leaving no wisdom, but fire spirits accompanied by the lonely sunwalker. In fact, it was impossible for human beings to become a sunwalker. It wasn't a realm that could be achieved by hard practice. All sunwalkers were born with the ability to transform into a sun. In star magic, of the endless gods' domains, magic related to the sun was a taboo. Even the class, Sunwalker itself, was also a taboo. In the Western gods' domain, in order to learn the forbidden magic Last Judgment, mags would be willing to pay the price with their lives. However, Last Judgment was just a natural phenomenon for the real Sunwalkers. Their bodies were surrounded by Last Judgment every minute and every second. In the end, all the Sunwalkers would have left the ground lonely, flew to the world of the stars, and even became a real sun in the sky. People would also devote their faith to these Sunwalkers, although they had no interest in being a so-called sun god. Hura Azda was such a Sunwalker. Unlike the gods in the Western gods' domain, who became a god by faith, he didn't need any believers. He became a sun god because he chose to sleep and became a son of a remote god's domain. When he woke up, he found that he had become the sun god of that god's domain. It was a problem for all Sunwalkers. If they slept too long, they would really become a sun. Putting down the golden scepter in his hand, only Hura Azda himself knew what it meant. It meant that he had given up his identity as a sun god. He would start a war using his true power. The power of a Sunwalker. Feel fear in the face of a Sunwalker. Holding the sun disk in his hand, Hura Azda's eyes became very dangerous. The appearance of a Sunwalker in the mortal world was equal to declaring the end of the world. Therefore, most Sunwalkers would stay away from the mortal worlds. Because of this, too few people could meet a Sunwalker, and lesser people would understand how powerful and dangerous a Sunwalker was. When Hura raised the sun disk, all gods and fantastic creatures felt a strong aura from it. It looked like a common golden wheel, but when the black particles around it started to explode, everyone's heartbeat accelerated. They all suddenly had an ominous presentiment that the end was coming. Of course, there was an exception. "I'm not afraid of you," Phoenix shouted with no fear. She was Phoenix, the immortal bird. Even if a real sun exploded, she would still live well in the fire of the sun. Why did she need to be worried? Solar flares. Hura Azda glanced at Phoenix. He was convinced that he had killed her just now, but she was still alive now. It seemed that Phoenix's immortality power was more exaggerated than the rumors he heard. "It doesn't matter. If I can't kill her, I will let her taste the pain of being killed. She would learn from it and give up." Initially, it was just a red spot, an astronomical phenomenon developed from a cluster of countless sunspots. However, this astronomical phenomenon didn't occur on the surface of a sun, but on the battlefield created by Hura Azda. In the next second, the solar flare's brightness had exceeded the limit of human eyes. If an ordinary person was here, even if he closed his eyes, his retinas would still be burned and blinded. If an astronomical phenomenon appeared at a place it shouldn't exist, what would happen? The answer was simple. The end of the world. Numerous golden-red flames covered the sky and the earth and were still diffusing infinitely. It was a real solar flare, an astronomical explosion. The angry Sunwalker, Hura Azda, finally revealed his real, horrible power after being provoked. No one could escape from the diffused blazing light wave, which was an all-around attack that had covered the entire world. The so-called forbidden magic of human beings was a joke compared to the solar flare, a real astronomical phenomenon. In the light wave, countless fire and light spirits began to fly. They were parts of the sun, they were the manifestation of the rules of the universe. These beautiful, young spirits happily opened their little wings, danced and eulogized the sun. They were the only inhabitants who kept company with the lonely Sunwalker, but they didn't have wisdom, they only knew to move along the sun, appearing in the solar flares and sunspots that could lead to the end of the world. The crust of the battlefield vaporized in an instant, like butter in a great fire. The endless solar particle storms covered and devoured the entire battlefield of gods, and this was only the beginning. Thousands of mushroom clouds rose into the sky, countless hot magma and flames shot into the sky and then were evaporated. The solar flare had just started erupting, and the whole battlefield of gods had reached the end stage. Leave. It's my sacrifice. Hura Azda showed his last mercy as a god, launching an ultimatum to the other 10 gods on the battlefield. Once the solar flare really broke out, it would trigger a battle that could totally eliminate the entire White Lotus Sword domain. Ha ha. Ancient Sun God. Aren't you too confident? One of the 7 human gods slowly extended his hand, and the hand gradually became distorted black and proliferated sucker-like organs on it. A fake god. Hura Azda despised looking at the fake god who dared to offend him. These fake gods weren't friendly. Compared to the sacrifice, they preferred to eat the witches who were holding the sacrificial ceremony. However, they were like a joke in the eyes of a Sunwalker. Hura himself had barbecued more than one squid who disguised as a god. The so-called fake god was just a larger polypod extraordinary creature. Only very few fake gods were strong enough to face a Sunwalker's sunfire. Most fake gods had tentacles and loved eating people. In Hura's eyes, the only value they had was to become a squid string baked by himself. According to his experience, the squid string made by fake god's body tasted good. Before becoming the god of the Persian god's domain, Hura Azda had played the role as a star squid hunter for a long time. To a lonely Sunwalker, it was a luxury to eat something decent, and fake god squid string was a classic cuisine to Sunwalkers. Hura Azda swallowed. He recalled the time when he hunted and roasted squid before he became the sun god. The temperature on the battlefield was still rising, from hundreds to thousands of degrees, soon reaching a value that no normal living creature could survive. However, none of the gods on the battlefield was a normal living creature, therefore, they could still withstand the temperature. His god power isn't easy to deal with. Why is it this guy? Yinglong shrank its huge body and carefully protected the egg, looking at Hura Azda with knitted brows. Hura Azda, the god of the Persian god's domain. Compared with his identity, his god power is more troublesome. Defying stood on the shivering egg. It just felt curious and came to see what the sacrifice was, but now, it realized that it was involved in big trouble. That egg. It was the West Queen's unborn daughter. Why did it come with Yinglong? If the West Queen's little daughter was injured here, all people here would be killed by the angry West Queen. Almost all the fantastic creatures knew that the West Queen loved her unborn daughter very much. She had prepared to pass the crown to this little princess, even though it was still an unhatched egg. If something happened to the egg, she and Yinglong didn't even dare to imagine what would happen. If she knew that the egg would also come, she and Yinglong would never dare to leave the Kunlun god's domain, trying to scramble for the sacrifice. Unlike other human gods and fake gods, she and Yinglong clearly knew how terrible and powerful an angry Sunwalker could be. Tens of thousands of degrees of heat was just a beginning for a Sunwalker. Compared to Sunwalkers, evil and fake gods were nothing. Why did people regard the Sunwalker as the sun god? Because they felt frightened. If an evil god descended into a mortal world, there was still a chance to drive it away. However, if it was a Sunwalker who descended into the mortal world, the world would immediately be ignited. There would never be any chance for any hero to save the world. Let's go, we shouldn't be here. Finding that the sacrifice was in the Sunwalker's hand, Defying and Yinglong made the same choice. Not all legend-ranked beings had an immortal body like Phoenix. Defying and Yinglong clearly knew that a Sunwalker was too strong to be their opponent. Bang! Just as Yinglong and Defying were ready to leave, from the egg that was well protected by them, a strange and powerful heartbeat suddenly came. How could it be? The princess hasn't formed a body yet. Defying and Yinglong shouted at the same time. Yinglong's body tightly wrapped around the egg, and Defying's wings raised high, using its strongest skill to protect the egg. Bang! Bang! No mistake. In the egg they protected, the smallest daughter of the West Queen, the unborn princess's heart was pounding heavily. At the same time, opposite the door of dusk, Yunshi's heart also suddenly began to beat faster, as if there was a voice calling him in the blurred world opposite the door. Bang! Bang! His strong heartbeat quickly attracted White Lotus's attention. She looked at the world behind the door, which was covered by endless light and fire, and lost in thought. My prince, have you summoned 2 real sons? Which of the 2 sons will you choose? Hura Azda also sensed it. There was a familiar odor coming from the direction of the 2 fantastic creatures. He vaguely recalled that these 2 fantastic creatures were the descendants of the West Queen. They were strong fire-type fantastic creatures, of course, they were no match for him. Why are they protecting the egg carefully? Why did I feel a familiar odor from the egg? Is it another fire-type fantastic creature? Yinglong was a fire-type dragon and the totem of emperors. Defying was also a fire-type fantastic creature, but it was slightly weaker than Yinglong. Phoenix was an exception. It was also a fire-type fantastic creature, but it wouldn't die in any situation. Even though Hura Azda was a Sunwalker, he felt a headache when facing Phoenix. So, what is the fantastic creature in that egg? At this time, the fake gods finally found something wrong. They come from a world called Abyss, which was located in the dark side of the infinite gods' domains, in the gap connected with endless nightmare worlds. These fake gods, or squid string in Hura's eyes, like to pretend to be a god. Deceive witches and eat them in the sacrificial ceremony was one of their favorite games. It was their happiest entertainment to see helpless witches turn into their food. To this end, they specially learned various tricks and deceptions and studied the loopholes in the sacrificial ceremony. For them, deceiving a witch and eating her had almost become a ritual, a proof of being recognized by the Abyss. No. Impossible. Why can't we leave? My body is burning. They were confused and frightened, because they just came to this place in the form of projections. Even if their projections were burnt to ashes, they wouldn't feel any pain. Why can't they leave? After all these years, you squids still cheat people in the same old way. You can pretend to be gods to deceive ignorant little girls. How dare you to think that this will also work in front of me? Hura Azda looked at the struggling fake gods with a happy smile. Catching squid was once one of my duties. The coordinates of your true bodies have already been exposed. The golden sun disk spun and flew out, dragging out several big squids, who liked the mixture of cuttlefish, king squash and pig squid from the endless abyss. They thought that they didn't need to worry about anything, because they just came using their projections. However, as a star squid hunter who had caught hundreds of squids, Hura Azda had rich experience in finding their true bodies by tracing their projections. Without the protection of the abyss, these squids' combat power was barely worth mentioning. They could only pretend to be fake gods in front of common hero-ranked witches. If they met a legend-ranked witch, their only fate was to be caught and become dried squid. This power, terrible, sun god. Hura Azda, looking at the several fake gods' true bodies being dragged out of the abyss, the remaining human gods finally understood what a strong opponent they were facing. Soon, realizing that they would be killed by the solar flare if they still stayed here, they made the right choice, gave up the sacrifice and ran away without hesitation. No matter how good the sacrifice was, only the living one could enjoy it. They weren't Phoenix, who wouldn't die no matter what happened. It was impossible for their projections to withstand the sun god's flames of fury. In the blink of an eye, only Phoenix, Yinglong, Defying, the egg, and the 3 squids who had been toasted, remained. Now, does any of you still want to stop me? Looking at Phoenix, who was blown into pieces again, Hura Azda decided to complete the contract quickly and actually obtain the special gem in his hand. I want it. A somewhat hazy voice sounded on the battlefield, which made the 2 fantastic creatures astonished. It's my thing, little guy, I came first. Hura Azda quickened his pace and wanted to complete the contract as quickly as possible in case that Phoenix revived again. As the supreme god of the Persian god's domain, he faced too many frustrations today. He felt as if there was an evil spirit in the darkness that was trying to stop him from grabbing this special golden-red gem. No, I came first, I was here first. You're the robber who robbed my gem halfway. Out of Hura's expectation, Phoenix had revived and flew back. So, am I the third? The callow voice echoed on the battlefield of gods, and soon came to its own conclusion, no. No matter who came first. Only the person who gets it is the number one. Ha ha. That's a cunning speech, but it's true. Hura nodded his head and endorsed the egg's words. Indeed, there is no such a rule in the world that the person who saw the treasure first could be the treasure's owner. No matter where we are, only the strongest person can have the best treasure. If you want it, you should come and steal it yourself. If you don't steal it, then someone else will rob you. No matter how much you like it, once you are robbed, it will never be yours. If you want something you like, try to be stronger, new little son. Hura Azda realized the true identity of the egg. He reached out his hand and millions of fiery red spears appeared in the air in an instant, locking on the fantastic creatures. Millions of flame spears blew up like a trumpet, declaring the end of the world. The solar flare finally evolved to the last stage. If the human gods still stayed on this battlefield, none of them would survive under this attack. Even Yinglong and Bifang, the two fire-type fantastic creatures, were unable to fend for themselves in this situation. Only Phoenix was still struggling. After all, she wouldn't die. Even if you said so. I want it, because I am the sun. On the altar of deity, Yunshi's body was instantly covered by a golden red light and suddenly disappeared. The next second, he saw endless golden red flame spears in front of him. Countless strange golden red fire clouds boiled and rotated around him. Countless light and fire spirits cheered and danced around him. In his body, an unimaginable power was controlling him, declaring its own voice to the world. I am the sun. I am the sun. Yunshi duplicated this sentence foolishly and thought that he must be dreaming. However, the horrible power that kept pouring into his body let him know that it wasn't a dream, but a miracle that was happening. This power is. Yunshi remembered it. On the starry sky chessboard, in the game with Orphina, he once summoned the projection of this unknown fantastic creature. However, it was just a game. In the real world, it should be impossible to encounter such a strong fantastic creature. Its beautiful wings showed a miraculous golden red color. The two colors reflected each other as if they were light and fire spirits. Even in the destructive solar flare, the glory of its wings was unique. I am the sun, again, the youngest daughter of the West Queen declared to Hura Azda, the Sunwalker. How is this possible? You are not even born yet. How can you appear? For the first time, Hura Azda couldn't hide the shock in his heart. None of the Sunwalkers could utter that sentence before they were awakened. I am the sun. This was what all Sunwalkers would say after they realized the essence of their bodies. For all Sunwalkers, it was the last thing they wanted to remember, but they had to engrave it deep in their memory. After saying it, they would forever embark on a lonely road that no one would understand. It had nothing to do with genius, race, origin, or gender. The reason why a Sunwalker could become a Sunwalker was all because of this sentence. I am the sun. Chapter 513. The Duel Between Two Suns. 1. I support you. Phoenix flew happily to Yunshi and danced around him with countless flame spirits. She didn't know the reason, but in her heart, she naturally felt an intimate aura from him. Just flying around him, she was intoxicated in a compulsive joy. On the contrary, she couldn't conceal her aversion to the sun god who robbed the precious gem from her own hands. Unforgivable. Thank you, but I won't let you obtain the gem either. The unknown egg, the fantastic creature who was possessing Yunshi's body, now declared. Oh, you found it, too. Hura Azda took a deep breath. At first glance, this golden red gem itself wasn't something too precious. It looked just like a variant of a common cryolite. Why could it draw so many extraordinary creatures' attention? Because there was a special aura contained in the golden red gem. It was hard to describe the temptation of the aura to fire-type creatures. Any gods who sensed the aura wouldn't remain indifferent. Cryolite was a rare treasure even amongst gods, plus the special aura inside it. Its value was 100 times higher than any common cryolites. Especially for fire-type, light-type, and sun-type gods, its value was even higher. Only the strongest gods could understand how rare and precious it was. Hura even wondered if it was the polymerized substance from a galaxy explosion. Otherwise, it couldn't explain the joy when he held the gem in his hand. How long haven't I felt this joy? After becoming a Sunwalker, he had almost forgotten all emotions as an ordinary person. He was a sun shining on all things, but he could only wander alone forever. Only when he hunted and barbecued the squid strings could he feel a little warmth. The universe was too unfriendly to Sunwalkers. Therefore, he must obtain this gem, which could let him feel warm again. None of you can stop me. Even if you are the same sun as me. He had been lonely for too long. He didn't want to give up the warmth in his hand. No, no one can steal it from me. Loneliness made him understand how precious this thing was, that could let him feel warm again. For this reason, he didn't mind beating down another sun. Little sun, you shouldn't be here. Holding the sun disk with both hands, the temperature around Hura's body began to rise rapidly. 100,000 Celsius degrees, 200,000 Celsius degrees, 300,000 Celsius degrees. A huge amount of air was ionized and projected out, forming a fierce solar storm. Materials around Hura could no longer exist in normal forms. The decomposed particles formed high-temperature plasmas and constantly emitted pop and crack sounds. In contrast, a large number of black particles started to gather around the golden-red bird. Sunspots began to emerge and formed countless shields in front of her. Obviously, there was a huge gap between the two sides in the use of their own solar power. Hura's control and adjustment ability to his solar power was far superior to the unknown golden-red bird's. Of course, the adjustment abilities was based on the unit of 10,000 degrees. For the sun, 10,000 degrees was the basic unit. In the human world, this temperature could melt steel instantaneously. No! If this goes on, I will be killed again. Phoenix waved her wings and flew restlessly around Yunxi, seemingly trying to protect the immature golden-red bird with her own body and wings. Of course, it was no use. Once Hura, the Sunwalker, got serious, she couldn't find any way to stop him. On the battlefield, only a sun could fight against another sun. The first SN drive opens. On the sun disk in Hura's hand, a golden mark began to shine, releasing infinite power. Huge solar flares began to shrink. The temperature around Hura rose to more than 1,000,000 Celsius degrees in one breath. Boiling golden-red plasma bubbles continued to emerge and burst around him. The entire battlefield began to falter because of the horrible high temperature. The entire battlefield had entered its countdown phase. This time, it wasn't because of Phoenix, but Hura who was going to destroy the battlefield using his solar power. The sun disk, the SN drive, the light furnace, the emergence of the power of the sun. It was the inexhaustible source of power in countless people's imaginations. It was a thing that couldn't be created scientifically or theoretically. Just like Cyber Elf Alpha's infinite computing power, the SN drive was the core of a sun, a real existence, a so-called perpetual motion machine. It was the unique ability of the Sunwalkers. Owning the SN drive meant that the Sunwalker could transfer himself into a real sun. Releasing the power of the SN drive meant that Hura had become serious. He had taken a real action to defeat the newborn golden-red bird. The number of SN drives could also be regarded as one of the criteria for the strength of a Sunwalker. As the supreme god of the Persian god's domain, an ancient god who survived in the twilight of the gods, at the peak of his powers, he could summon 12 SN drives at the same time. Chapter 514, The Duel Between Two Suns. 2. Every SN drive was equal to a real sun. Investigating its source, it seemed to go back to a very distant era. In the time before the endless gods' domains was established, when the gods just set foot in other worlds. Before the twilight of the gods, there were once 12 SN drives in Hura's sun disk. As the cost of surviving from the twilight of the gods, he lost half of his SN drives. Ordinary legend-ranked beings weren't qualified to let Hura, the sun god, liberated the SN drives in the sun disk. In other words, the golden-red bird had had the power to make Hura become serious. He had recognized its power. Hura's true body didn't descend into this world. His body here was formed by the strength of faith from the millions of sand soldiers. Therefore, the power he showed now was already his limit. On the contrary, although the golden-red bird came with its true body, her true body was still an egg with zero attack power. Therefore, she used another method to awaken its future appearance in advance. She possessed Yunshi's body. With Yunshi's body as a medium, the golden red bird opened its wings and gave its first chirp to the ancient sun god. In the chirp, the golden red bird waved its wings, flying faster and higher. She was born to be above everything, even if her opponent was an ancient god. She didn't mind the throne of the sun god, because she was born to fly above the 33 heavens, shining on all things. Amongst all fantastic creatures, she was the strongest one, who had a strong self-confidence even before she was born. The spirits of light and fire sang together, offering their joy to the newborn sun. The old sun, the new sun, at the moment the two suns met, they would inevitably burst out earth-shaking sparks. Whatever, I don't care. Phoenix chased after the golden red bird and rushed up to the top of the sky. On the ground, Hura was absorbed in controlling the sun disk in his hands. For Sunwalkers, the worry was never about energy shortage, but about restraining their impulse to destroy everything. If he released all the energy contained in the SN drive, not only the battlefield would be destroyed, even the White Lotus Sword domain below would also be totally destroyed. The witches who summoned him were still waiting for his arrival in the sword domain. I must thoroughly solve this minor problem quickly. Yes, in the eyes of the sun god, Hura Azda, the golden red bird was still no match for him. Even though he had lost half of the SN drives he was still the strongest sun god in the Persian god's domain. With his rich experience, 6 SN drives were enough for him to defeat dozens of gods at once. If he still had 12 SN drives now, he could even temporarily reach level 9, the highest level of a legend-ranked god could reach. In Hura's eyes, the golden red bird did have the qualification to sit on the same level with himself in the future, but that would be 10,000 of years later, when she had obtained at least 10 SN drives. At this moment, the golden red bird didn't even have a SN drive. How could it be match for him? Countless high-temperature plasma bubbles spread behind Hura. The world seemed to be cooked, rivers evaporated, seas dried up, and mountains burned up. This was the inevitable consequences of a Sunwalker's arrival on the Earth, as well as the prelude to the extinction of a world. I want to fly to higher places, follow me. Together, to the sky above the 33 heavens, a crisp, firm, tender voice echoed inside Yunshi's mind. Even after seeing the power of Hura's SN drive, she was still fearless and courageous. Whoever my opponent is, I won't lose. I want to surpass my opponents and become the strongest. So, trust me, lend me your strength. My strength. Yunshi was confused. There was no room for him in this level of battle. What could a hero-ranked baker do in the battle between two suns? Make bread on the spot to supplement physical strength for her? This time, his body wasn't being possessed by Cassina's will attachment, nor Lilibet was protecting him with her power. He really didn't know what to do at this moment. I believe in you. You have such power and such a future. You can also trust me that I can help you obtain the future you will have in advance. So I summoned you. My power. A drop of sweat fell down from Yunshi's forehead. Has she found that I'm the Star Child? However, although he knew that he was a Star Child, he didn't know how a Star Child should fight, nor did Maya know. It seemed that his fighting force in his past life wasn't very strong, otherwise, he wouldn't be tragically killed by his 4 ex-girlfriends. Not you now, but you in the future. What you want, what you imagine, what you can become. The strongest you. The you on the starry sky chessboard. Her tender voice affirmed Yunshi's future. At that time, she felt the unusual aura, so she opened her eyes inside the egg and descended onto the starry sky chessboard. What awakened her was the opportunity Yunshi had. She didn't know the reason, because the true Yunshi didn't have any legend-ranked power, but she wouldn't mistake the aura, and because of the aura, she came and joined the battle. She didn't want to give that gem to anyone else. So it was you were summoned by me. Yunshi finally understood why the golden red bird came here. Chapter 5:15. The Duel Between Two Suns, 3, which came first? The chicken or the egg? I was summoned to the battlefield by this unknown golden red bird, and this golden red bird was summoned by me. Yunshi felt regret. Why did he play so recklessly on the starry sky chessboard? Why did he summon it into the game? However, there was no medicine for regret in the world. It was impossible for him to leave now. What would he become if they were defeated? Looking at the plasma bubbles under his feet, he didn't dare to imagine it. Even if it was a hero-ranked being who fell into the plasma bubbles, he or she would be instantly evaporated, not to mention ordinary people. This was the power of the sun god. So, what can I do now? I can only imagine. He didn't know how he fought in his previous life, he could only imagine what the legend-ranked power should be. When was his closest moment to the legend-ranked power? Undoubtedly, it was when he was on the starry sky chessboard, playing with Cyber Elf Alpha. Cyber Elf Alpha was the only legend-ranked being he had ever defeated, although he just defeated her in a game. The power the golden red bird wanted was not the he in the real world, but the he on the starry sky chessboard. In the real world, Yunshi was just a hero-ranked baker, which was not even qualified to be cannon fodder here. On the starry sky chessboard, he was the master of Stargo. He was the invincible legend. Only on the starry sky chessboard, he had the power to defeat a legend-ranked being. I am a legend. Being pushed to the limit, Yunshi could only exert his infinite imagination and hint at himself. You are a legend. In response to Yunshi's voice, the young golden red bird began to increase its strength and merge with Yunshi, just as she fought side by side with him on the starry sky chessboard. I am the light. Yunshi closes his eyes, recalling the glorious moments on the starry sky chessboard. I am the light. Behind the golden red bird, numerous golden feathers floated down, giving off bursts of blazing sunshine. What's going on? Hura watched in astonishment as the golden red bird flew higher and higher into the sky. Not right, it's not right. It's just a newborn fantastic creature. How could her power rise at such an incredible rate? She is just a baby bird who hadn't obtained her own SN drive yet. How could she understand, and even master the power of the real sun? I am a myth. Yunshi's eyes gradually become dim. I am a myth. The golden red bird continued to weave the fantasy belonging to Yunshi and her. Impossible. Impossible. The secret of the sun is a rule that needs to be learned for thousands of years. How can you master it now? What is it? What is helping her? Hura couldn't believe his eyes. In his eyes, the golden red baby bird was growing at a miraculous rate, like a baby who's suddenly become a pretty young girl overnight. I am the sun. Recalling the battles on the starry sky chessboard, Yunshi suddenly opened his eyes and declared the truth that only Sunwalkers could say. I am the sun. The golden red bird repeated the sentence cheerfully. Yes, this was what she was expecting and waiting for. For this, she crossed countless worlds and came here to meet him. Endless golden red flames burst out with glowing lights and surrounded Yunshi's body. The golden red bird disappeared. Instead, a figure with golden red wings appeared. Brand new SN drives were placed on both sides of the wings of this figure, emitting the aura of the eternal blazing sun. At that instant, the same words echoed in their ears. Everything rises to welcome you. Praise you, the only light. You will rise to the top of the world's sky. You rise, you shine, you take away the darkness upon the earth. You are the King of all gods and the Lord of all things. Everything comes because of you, everything becomes sacred because of you. From your wings, the sky and the sea are interlaced. The holy temple is glorified by your name, and you will become a legend in legends. We come from you and are holy because of you. You will wear your holy crown on the clouds and take the throne. You are the source of all life, and you have crossed the river of time. Praise you, my Lord, for your life will wake up from your slumber, and you will be immortal for thousands of years, now and forever. It was an ode to the sun, to the Sunwalkers. It was the worship of all living beings who believe in the sun. You created a SN drive by yourself. Listening to this familiar ode, Hura realized that the newborn golden red bird had become a new Sunwalker, just like himself. It's not understandable. It's totally unreasonable. The creation of a SN drive was an enormous project. No matter how talented a Sunwalker was, it was impossible to become one within such a short time. Moreover, it didn't just create one, it just created two. 2 SN drives. Did he just witness the birth of the most talented Sunwalker in the universe just now? Opening his eyes, Yunshi could clearly feel the endless power of fire in his body and the pair of SN drives on his shoulders. He felt like he was dreaming. Why can I succeed in such a simple way? He just imagined the power of the sun, but he really knew nothing about the nature of the sun. He simply imagined what he would look like if he could transform into a sun. It seemed that there was some force in the dark that helped him weave the rules of the sun, and even told him the ranks of the golden red bird and Hura the sun god. Sunwalker was one of the most powerful careers in the endless gods' domains. Now, he was also a Sunwalker. Undoubtedly, he had zero knowledge about the sun, which wouldn't be taught in the Sword Palace. However, he naturally understood the inside structure of the SN drive. If it wasn't because the golden red bird's power could only create 2 SN drives at this moment, he felt that he could make more SN drives. Thank you, great stars. Apparently, the great stars helped him again. After that, Yunshi started to make the god weapon that Sunwalkers could use. For Sunwalkers, they didn't need any material, because they themselves were the best materials. Hura Asda's sun disk was made in this way, and the god weapon Yunshi was going to make would also be made in this way. Tell me your name. While driving the 2 SN drives to make the god weapon, Yunshi asked for the unknown fantastic creature's name. I have no name yet. This question really baffled the mysterious fantastic creature. Of course, she had no name, because her true body was still an egg. She wasn't born yet. If Yunshi hadn't summoned her onto the starry sky chessboard, she would have been born after thousands of years. Now she was in a fantastic state, existing in theory, but not really existing, like a cat in a box. Before anyone observed it, no one would know if it was alive or dead, and Yunshi was the one who found her and observed her. Well, I'll give you a name. You have beautiful golden wings, and you are a sun. Then, I will call you Golden Sun Crow. Yunshi casually gave it a name. At the same time, an exquisite god weapon was shaping in his hands. Although he could use it one time on the battlefield, Yunshi still played all his imagination into it, casting it into the most gorgeous posture. Golden Sun Crow. This name, very good, so, my name will be Golden Sun Crow, the sun above the 33 heavens. The mysterious fantastic creature was very satisfied with this name. Well, then we have to win, Yunshi said, and had no other choice. If he won, he could survive. If he lost, he would be burned to ashes. Well, it's better to win. Sorry, sun god. We summoned you, but now I have to drive you away. The god weapon of the Sunwalker was forged. It was a golden red bow with a black bowstring. If one looked at it carefully, one would find that the black on the bowstring was formed by numerous black particles. Unlike Hura's sun disk, Yunshi's god weapon was purely a temporary one-off weapon made for this battle. Because he refined it from Golden Sun Crow's power, he named it Destroyer of the Sun Crow. After the bow was formed, Yunshi shot an arrow at Hura without hesitation. A gentle vibration dispersed at Yunshi's fingertips. It wasn't the vibration of sound, nor the vibration of light and flame. It was the vibration of the world's string, a golden arrow shooting out from the bow. The first shot of the destroyer of the Golden Crow. The arrow opened its golden red wings, instantly detonating on Hura's sun disk. The next moment, a loud sound echoed through the entire battlefield. Numerous golden red flames burst out from the center of the solar flare, billions of light and fire spirits flew together. The land under their feet completely disappeared under the impact, not even leaving a speck of dust. Its power is too exaggerated. Even Yunshi himself was frightened by the arrow's terrible power. The entire battlefield was created by Hura's god power. Even the solar flare took a long time to melt the ground. However, a single arrow from the bow had completely destroyed the battlefield. If it wasn't because Lilibet was maintaining the boundaries of the battlefield, the impact would have even affected the White Lotus sword domain below. This was the power of the sun. Once again, Yunshi realized how unreasonable the power of the legend rank was. No wonder that people in the endless gods' domains would regard legend-ranked beings as gods. The hero rank symbolized mankind's longing for extraordinary power. The legend rank was the strongest imagination of human beings for immortality and supremacy over all things. At this moment, what Yunshi used is the power of the legend rank. It seemed that Golden Sun Crow hadn't understood how to use her power, so she gave Yunshi all control of her power. In fact, Yunshi himself was very guilty, because he also didn't know how to use the legend-ranked power. Well, at least, we have 2 SN drives. 2 is better than 1, isn't it? With this idea, he once again pulled open the bowstring. The string of the world trembled again. It was the cry of the world, it was the declaration of the Sunwalker's power. The second shot of the destroyer of the Golden Crow. Solar flare, exploding. Facing the provocation launched by the new sun, Hura launched his strongest counterattack. With the sun disk rotating at a high speed in his hand, the SN drives inside it emitted an incredibly high temperature. A series of fusion phenomena appeared around Hura. The boiling sea of plasma bubbles emitted hundreds of millions of light spirits, a bolt of lightning which was not inferior to the golden arrow blasted off. As a result of the collision of the 2 god weapons, there was an unprecedentedly huge distortion in the center of the battlefield. The high temperature over 1 million degrees had turned into numerous brilliant light curtains, intertwining together like a 7-colored rainbow. For a moment, neither of the combatants, Hura and Yunshi, could see anything on the battlefield. The next second they lost their sight, they both made their choices. Hura predicted that Yunshi would inevitably shoot a 3rd arrow. Therefore, his sun disk continued to compress and condense the power of the solar flare, ready for the next round of bombardment with the new sun. In this respect, there is no doubt that Hura had the upper hand. Even though he couldn't understand why the golden red bird could construct a pair of SN drives so quickly, he still had an advantage in terms of his control of his power. Probably, after the 12th round of the bombardment between the arrow and the lightning, Hura could launch a counterattack. After calculating the consumption of the SN drive, Hura showed a winning smile. On the other hand, Yunshi had never thought about the consumption of the SN drives. After all, he had zero knowledge about how to use the legend-ranked power. In fact, the reason why he shot Hura was simple, because he wanted to test the power of the bow. And now, he was very satisfied with its power. When Yunshi lost his sight, Yunshi made a choice quickly. The bow instantly split and became a pair of golden-red double swords. Yes, from the very beginning, the bow was designed to be able to be disassembled, which was inspired by Yunqi's weapon. An archer who doesn't understand close-quarters fighting isn't a good archer. Moreover, Yunshi was not an archer, but a swordsman. Holding the twin swords in his hands, Yunshi rushed to Hura and the skill of the sky-flying sword naturally emerged in his mind. Yunshi instinctively realized that the sky-flying sword he used now was no longer the same as in the past. It was more unrestrained and fierce. Perhaps this was the real sky-flying sword. Only the creatures who could fly freely in the sky could use this sword skill properly. Hura opened his eyes wide in astonishment. Isn't your god weapon a golden bow? Why are you holding twin swords now? Are you really an archer? Yunshi didn't think so much. He was not an archer anyway. Like the first ray of an aurora in the sky, Yunshi had rushed to Hura, whose sun disk was still compressing and condensing the power of the solar flare. Brandishing the twin swords, he launched the strongest attack he just mastered. Without a chance to fight back, Hura, who made a huge mistake in prediction, was torn apart, cut apart and shattered. Numerous golden red fires exploded and spread out as if a real sun just erupted. The sun god, Hura, uttered a hysterical cry, "I'll remember you. Don't think it's over. Young son of Kunlun God's domain." Boom. The entire battlefield couldn't be sustained at last. The solar flare exploded. The solar flare, which had just evolved into tens of millions of degrees of temperature, was detonated in advance, transformed into a huge light pillar and rushed into the endless void, then dispersed by an ice blue sword. The golden red bird flew happily to the sky, celebrating its victory. The Persian god's domain was one of the few gods' domains whose gods survived the twilight of the gods. Above the god's domain, in the kingdom of God, dressed in white silk robes, devout girls knelt under the sun god's statue, praying devoutly. There were 12 similar squares, and in the center of each square, there was a wheel of the sun. If one combined the 12 squares together, one would find that they formed a huge wheel of the sun. This was the sun god, Hura's kingdom of God. He didn't need the strength of faith from his believers, therefore, his statue wasn't in human form. As a Sunwalker, he didn't need to show his human form to his believers, because he was the supreme god, he was the light, he was the only truth in the entire Persian god's domain. When Hura was defeated in the White Lotus sword domain, all the praying girls heard an angry roar. Damn! Why do you have two SN drives? Young son of Kunlun god's domain. We win. Phoenix waved her wings and soared into the sky together with the golden red bird. The earth and sky were both shattered, only Lilibet was left, picking up the mess as usual. As she brandished her ice blue sword, the world gradually recovered from the destruction caused by the two Sunwalkers and 3 SN drives. However, even the power of the Guardian of the Sky Sword God's domain couldn't completely dispel the terrible powers of the two Sunwalkers. The reconstructed Earth was still a world filled with magma everywhere, more than tens of millions of light and fire spirits cheering and dancing in the sky and on the ground. Have we won? Looking at his body turning into a golden red bird again, Yunshi still didn't believe his eyes. Golden Sun Crow, and he really defeated the ancient sun god. Even though it was obviously only a projection, it was undoubtedly a strong legend-ranked projection. If he didn't see the precious gem in the mouth of the golden red bird, he might have thought that he was dreaming. On the burning earth, the door of dusk, which once disappeared, opened again. What do you want? When Yunshi gazed at the door of dusk, Golden Sun Crow asked. Speaking of this, she remembered that she came for the sacrificial ceremony. Fortunately, the White Lotus sword domain wasn't too far away from the Kunlun god's domain, so she could come here with her true body, and Hura had to descend into this void using a projection, which was the greatest advantage she had in this war. In the end, Hura failed to liberate the second SN drive before he was defeated. He didn't have sufficient god power to summon the second SN drive from the Persian god's domain to the battlefield. Ultimately, Yunshi was correct. 2 SN drives are stronger than 1 SN drive. What do I want? Yunshi repeated the question and was somewhat puzzled. This is a sacrificial ceremony, and you are a member in the ceremony. Moreover, you helped me defeat my greatest opponent. According to the rules of the sacrificial ceremony, I can fulfill your wish. I can give you the best sword skills, or the best seeds of bloodline. As long as you want something, I can find it and give it to you. She wasn't joking. As a princess of the Kunlun god's domain, the youngest daughter of the West Queen, as long as she asked, countless fantastic creatures would rush forward and present their most valuable treasures to her. Yunshi finally realized that the golden red bird wasn't an ordinary being. The distance between him and her was actually more distant than the countless stars. At this moment, he just used her strength to enter the realm of the legend rank, which was not his own strength. The victory of defeating the sun god made him feel highly flattered. The fact was, he wasn't Cassina the battle god nor Golden Sun Crow. His rank was still far away from the legend rank. So, what do I need? Yunshi carefully considered. He didn't lack sword skills, he had the sky flying sword, Yunhai's quadrant sword, and the great sword maid's legacy were all great sword skills that were beyond mere mortal's imagination. The seeds of bloodline were also not too valuable to him. He had the star system, and the girls of the Starwing Knights could provide him with rich experiences of practice. Moreover, he himself was actually the star child, he didn't really need any other bloodlines. Oh, I know what I want. The crane-wing twin swords were very good, however, after witnessing the power of god weapons, he began to look forward to having a real god weapon belonging to himself. He was now only a step away from being a hero-ranked swordsman. After he reached the 4th rank, he would be able to develop his own god weapon. Sunwalker was so terrible that even if the golden red bird accidentally released its own power, it may have destroyed the world. However, there was one thing that Yunshi really wanted to have. If he could use it well, maybe it could help him to forge his own god weapon. If possible. Yunshi said sheepishly. You only want that. Is that all? Golden Sun Crow didn't expect that that was what Yunshi wanted. Her golden red feathers drifted down quietly, and for a while, she was at a loss. Well, that's all right. It's what I want most. Is that really all right? Thank you. That's all right. I like it very much. In their spiritual communion, Yunshi obtained the treasures he wanted, which was absolutely impossible to appear in the White Lotus Sword domain. The door of dusk opened, and the golden-red bird turned into a golden flame, flying above the altar of deity. I bestow the blessing of the sun on you. Just like Hura the sun god recently, Golden Sun Crow was in an extremely good mood. She granted the twin witches her blessings and gave them gifts at the same time. Red Lotus got a golden feather. The feather merged into her Red Lotus holy sword, and the sword was thoroughly sublimated, possessing the attribute of the sun fire. White Lotus got a golden gem, which contained the power of a real sun. As for Yunshi, in addition to obtaining the golden red bird's blessing, he also got the gift he wanted, a furnace the size of a palm. This was what Yunshi wanted, a SN drive, sealed. Although it was actually made by himself, it was impossible for him to use it in the real world, so he had to ask Golden Sun Crow to seal it up and turn it into a palm-sized furnace. It was probably the most precious gift he had ever obtained, so he really felt a little embarrassed when Golden Sun Crow gave it to him. I'm glad to have come here. If there is a chance, you can summon me next time. Remember, my name is Golden Sun Crow, the sun above the 33 heavens. After the deal was completed, Golden Sun Crow looked very happy. To her, it was a natural thing to give Yunshi the SN drive. After all, it didn't belong to her from the very beginning, since Yunshi helped her create it. Moreover, Yunshi only took away one of the SN drives, he also left one for her. Isn't this the so-called love token? The young Golden Sun Crow almost flew up with pleasure. If Yunshi knew what she was thinking, he would only think that she read too much into it. The SN drives were priceless treasures, why would he take them both? The remaining SN drive, of course, belonged to Golden Sun Crow. He was the one who took the most advantage. Sister, our luck is really good. Looking at the enthusiastic Golden Sun Crow, White Lotus felt as if she was dreaming. Yeah, the gods this time are very kind. We are very lucky. Although Red Lotus didn't know why it wasn't the sun god who stepped over the door of dusk, she had a feeling that she shouldn't look into it seriously. At any rate, the golden red bird's power wasn't inferior to the sun god, and she was generous and talkative too. However, Mai's luck was really bad, she only obtained a very common furnace. Anyway, she was lucky enough to obtain Golden Sun Crow's blessing. When Mai suddenly disappeared on the altar at that time, Red Lotus thought that there was something wrong in the sacrificial ceremony and she had just been eaten by an unknown monster. Great God, you can transform into the human form and stay in this mortal world for a day. However, you can only move around the altar in the range of 10 kilometers. Do you have any plans? I can stay here for a whole day. Golden Sun Crow remembered that there was indeed such a rule in the ceremony. After the god signed the contract with the witches in the sacrificial ceremony, the god could stay in the mortal world for a day. If it was an evil god who deceived the witches and went across the door of dusk, it would become the most dangerous day. Because for 24 hours, the witches had no way to drive the evil god away. This time, there were indeed fake gods who tried to get in here. Unfortunately, they had all been found by Hura the sun god and barbecued by him. They were also the only consolation prize Hura had after being defeated by Yunshi and Golden Sun Crow. After all, most fake and evil gods lurked in the abyss, it wasn't easy to catch them. Well, what can I do in a day? Naturally, the newborn Golden Sun Crow had no common sense. She looked at Yunshi with curiosity in her golden pupils. That. A lot of things. Yunshi looked at the golden red bird, having a headache. What should I do? Does anyone have the experience to deal with a golden red bird? Hey, the god really likes her. Red Lotus looked at Mai and Golden Sun Crow in surprise. Most gods summoned by witches, apart from the necessary responses after accepting the sacrifices, wouldn't say a word to the witches. Essentially, gods and witches were not equal at all. Apart from the few legend-ranked witches, gods wouldn't take a glance at any other witches. Chapter 517, A Date with the God. 1. Why don't you go on a date? White Lotus made an unusual proposal to Golden Sun Crow with a bright smile on her face. What? Red Lotus looked at her sister in astonishment, as if she had never known her sister, White Lotus, before. How can it be possible that my sister is so alive? As the witch who could master the great circulation, White Lotus didn't really believe in any gods. Why was she suddenly so enthusiastic about the golden red bird? My, let's go out on a date together. It's rare to date with a god. It would be an event that could be recorded in the history of the White Lotus sword domain. White Lotus squinted at Yunxi, who was as bewildered as Red Lotus. Yunxi tried to blink his eyes, suggesting that he had no experience in doing such things. White Lotus smiled and nodded, indicating that she knew it. However, it had been decided. Oh, I'll try this date. It must be interesting. Golden Sun Crow, who waved her wings and was very satisfied with White Lotus's proposal. What should I do now? Going on a date with a god? Yunxi had never heard of such a thing. He watched White Lotus' fingertips draw a mysterious rune in the air, and then Golden Sun Crow's body transformed into a human. Transforming the incarnation of gods into human shape was also one of the unique secret skills the witches had. No matter how special the gods were, if they agreed to a contract with the witch, they could temporarily stay in the human world for a day. Because Golden Sun Crow was essentially still an unborn fantastic creature, her human form was a young girl about 7 or 8 years old, whose height wasn't taller than Yunxi's waist. Even so, her appearance had proved that she had great potential to be a beauty in the future. This could be confirmed by the eyes of the people who passed by them on the street. She wore golden red clothes that was gorgeous, had a beautiful oval face, tall nose, small red cherry lips, and bright eyes as if there were flames burning in her pupils. Rings wrapped with golden wires drooped on both sides of her cheek, raising her beautiful eyebrows. She looked very proud. On her back, a pair of small golden wings stretched out with jeweled decorations on them, which were actually the blessings and protection the West Queen cast for her daughter. At this moment, the human-shaped Golden Sun Crow was holding Yunxi's hand, strolling around on the streets. White Lotus and Red Lotus cast a special magic of witches on themselves, making their bodies become invisible in ordinary people's eyes. In the eyes of the people on the street, they could only see Yunxi and a little girl holding each other's hand, strolling on the street. Looking down on the Golden Crow Princess, Yunxi could clearly see her moving, slender neck. His face blushed and he quickly turned away. Undoubtedly, when the little Golden Crow Princess grew up, she would surely become an absolute beauty, but now she was still too young. To be honest, Yunxi even felt a little guilty when he remembered that he just asked for a priceless SN drive from this little girl. He felt as if he just deceived an ignorant child and robbed her of her treasure. Is that really good? Yunxi, aren't you a gentleman? Yunxi questioned himself in his heart. How would a gentleman deceive a young girl? My SN drive. Is the furnace easy to use? After touching Yunxi's hand for a while, Golden Crow Princess suddenly asked. That is, of course, it's very useful. Taking out the furnace, Yunxi skillfully lit the fire and toasted a piece of bread on the furnace. After a while, the bread emitted a pleasant smell. As he expected, the bread toasted on the furnace, sealed SN drive, would naturally contain the taste of the sun. Well, probably there wouldn't be any bread oven in the world better than this one. Of course, he would also use it to forge his first god weapon in the future. Long live the furnace. Gu, looking at Yunxi eating the toasted bread, Golden Crow Princess couldn't help but swallow. It looks delicious. What's that soft, fragrant, golden food? Why isn't the information about this food in my inherited memory? Do you want to eat some? Yunxi tore off a piece of bread and handed it over to her. Probably in the Endless God's domain, only he would use an SN drive to toast bread. Yes. Golden Crow Princess smiled and grabbed the piece of bread from Yunxi's hand. She bit it in a very rude way. Wow. It's delicious. It's delicious. It wasn't only because of the power of the sun inside it, but also because it was the first time she ate food in her life. The bread itself was a piece of high-quality, hero-ranked bread. After being toasted on the furnace, even Yunxi himself was surprised and satisfied with its taste. Unfortunately, Hua Hua wasn't here. I really want to share this bread with her. Yunxi couldn't help but miss his childhood sweetheart. Is it really so delicious? Can you give me a piece of bread too? Looking at their pleased expression, White Lotus also felt curious and wanted to taste it. Well, it's just a loaf of bread, how delicious can it be? Red Lotus disdained. All right. Yunshi tore off a piece of bread. He hesitated for a moment, then divided it into 2 pieces and handed them to White Lotus and Red Lotus respectively. The simple action let White Lotus' eyes suddenly become gentle. My prince, you do understand. That's right. Only in this way is the correct answer. Well, bread is bread, I don't believe that it can contain other tastes. Red Lotus bit this piece of bread viciously as if she was biting a person. Incredibly, the taste on the tip of her tongue was a taste she had never tasted in her life. Yunshi was actually the only hero-ranked baker in the entire White Lotus sword domain, therefore, what Red Lotus tasted was the best bread in the entire White Lotus sword domain. Moreover, this piece of bread was toasted on the furnace, it had naturally contained a trace of the power of the sun. Even though it was just a tiny bit of the power of the sun, it had made the hero-ranked bread become more delicious. So much so, that it was even beyond Yunshi's imagination. Ahu! Red Lotus gorged, almost biting her tongue. Why is this bread so delicious? Is it really bread? None of the bread she had ever tasted was as delicious as this piece of bread. No, none of the foods she had ever tasted was as delicious as this piece of bread. Red Lotus didn't like this maid, however, she couldn't deny that Mai's bread was so delicious that she wanted to cry. She couldn't outrage her conscience and say that it wasn't delicious. Delicious. Red Lotus finally had to make her own comment honestly. It's delicious. It's delicious. Compared with Red Lotus, Golden Crow Princess's response was the most straightforward. In contrast to her sister, White Lotus nibbled the piece of bread bit by bit, letting the sweet and delicious taste spread out in her mouth, and then slowly entered her throat. Ah, it's great to find another advantage my prince has. My prince's handmade bread is really wonderful. Don't worry, there's still a lot of bread. Looking at White Lotus, Red Lotus, and Golden Crow Princess, Yunshi was a little embarrassed. He really didn't put anything strange in his bread. Why did all 3 of them look at him with such desire in their eyes, as if they were puppies waiting to be fed? Taking out a loaf of bread again, Yunshi skillfully toasted the bread on the furnace. Just now, it was only his first time using the furnace. His control of the furnace was more or less immature and the temperature wasn't the best. This time, he had become more skilled in the use of the furnace. As a result, the smell of the toasted bread spilled out this time. Not only White Lotus, Red Lotus, and the Golden Crow Princess smelt it, but also the people on the street smelt it. What is the sweet smell? A businessman sniffed. His name was Li Yun, and he swore that although he had traveled around the entire Sky Sword God's domain, and as a big businessman, he was even qualified to enjoy the royal banquet in the Great Sheer Sword domain, this was still the first time he smelt such an unusual aroma. Taking a gentle breath, his body could clearly feel the incredible warmth contained in the smell. Not only Li Yun, but also all the people on the street and in the stores smelt this irresistible fragrance. Without exception, everyone was captivated by the smell and could not help drooling. What's the scent? Are there any food stores selling this kind of delicacy? No, absolutely not. If there was such a food store, it would have been famous a long time ago. Is it a new food store which opened today? Is it advertising? No, I guess it's a chef who is publicizing his latest works. Soon, someone discovered the source of the aroma. It wasn't a new food store, nor a chef who temporarily set up a stall on the street. Ah, over there. It's from that maid, the thing in her hands. Wait, bread? Yoon, she looked at the people flocking to him in embarrassment. Wait, what is this situation now? Chapter 518, A Date with the God, 2, Miss Maid, can you sell the bread in your hand to me? Li Yoon was the first who rushed to Yoonshi. Just tell me the price. Money is never a problem for me. How long since the last time I've had this impulse? Just like that royal banquet in the Great Sheer Sword domain, when I first smelt the smell of barbecued male fiery dragon, the cells all over my body couldn't help cheering. This is it. It must be this. The best food in my dream, which is even more delicious than the meat of the male fiery dragon. As a famous gourmet and successful businessman in the Sky Sword God's domain, his dream was to eat different kinds of delicacies every day. Today, in front of him, there was an unknown delicacy that he had never tasted before. How can he let go of this opportunity? Wait a minute. I'll buy it too, Miss Maid, make an offer. Don't grab it. What bread is it, Miss Maid? Do you have any more? Can you tell me who made it? Within a moment, Yunshi was surrounded by people who wanted to buy his bread, which made him feel both funny and annoyed. This bread is not for sale. As a former bread store owner, Yunshi never thought that his bread would have such a hot day. Unfortunately, this bread is really not for sale. Because the bread was made of his hero-ranked baker ability, and it was toasted by the furnace, in fact, it was already a priceless treasure. Moreover, he could only store up 100 loaves of bread using his hero-ranked ability. All of them were his strategic stockpiles. At any rate, Yunshi wouldn't sell his valuable bread to ordinary people. He would only use them in the most important moments. At this moment, he presented his most precious bread to Golden Sun Crow and the Twin Witches. It meant that he really regarded them as important. Even his childhood sweetheart, Hua Hua, hadn't enjoyed this treatment. Of course, the main reason was that he just obtained the furnace, SN Drive, from Golden Crow Princess and just began to learn to use it to toast bread. Not for sale. Li Yun looked depressed. After hearing his words, most people around Yunshi sighed, and some of them began to inquire about the origin of the bread. Miss Maid, can you tell me who made the bread? Was this bread made by Miss Maid herself? No way. How old is she? I'm sure it's definitely a masterpiece from a real, respectable old master of bread. Sorry, I can't tell you. Yunshi shook his head. After all, he couldn't expose his identity. Don't pretend. I tell you, you must sell it today. Finally, someone angrily rebuked. It was a young man dressed in the clothes of the servant of the White Lotus Sword Palace. Anyone could see his arrogance from his attitude. Go away, go away. I'm serving for the White Lotus Sword Palace. Mind your business. Being shouted at by the young people, almost all the people around him showed sympathy for Yunshi and quickly walked away. For most people living in the Sword Tip area, the White Lotus Sword Palace was the master of their entire world. Even if it was only a servant from the Sword Palace, they didn't dare to offend him. Only several people from other sword domains still looked at them with curiosity. White Lotus Sword Palace. Yunshi didn't understand why the young servant looked so proud after saying it. The servant walked to him with a haughty expression and then looked at him, stretching out his hand. This bread is good. I'm sure the witches of the Sword Palace will like it. Give me it. Hearing this, people around them couldn't help but worry more. In the White Lotus Sword Palace, the witches of the Witch Palace were the most prestigious people. Because of this, their servants also thought that they were superior to others outside the Sword Palace. His tone when saying "give me it" was so skillful, perhaps he had been used to being rapacious to other people. The witches of the Sword Palace. Yunshi subconsciously looked at the twin witches with astonishment. What was this? Their servant was going to grab the witches and their god's bread. Let go of me. I'll reveal my true identity and tear this bastard to pieces. Realizing what a shameful thing she just witnessed, Red Lotus roared with anger. The person who dares to rob the god's bread must be punished by heaven. From now on, the Witch Palace wouldn't recruit any new male servant. Don't worry. You won't give away it for nothing. Generally, a loaf of bread costs only several copper coins. This bread smells really good. How about I pay 10 times the price higher than common bread? The young servant still didn't know that his superior, Red Lotus, was angrily staring at him. He looked at Yunshi with a smirking smile and rubbed his fingers in front of Yunshi. Li Yun stared at the servant in astonishment. The smell of the bread is even better than the smell of the barbecued male fiery dragon's meat. Can it be bought by 10 times the price of common bread? You're not buying but robbing. Sorry, I won't sell this bread. You'd better leave now. Looking at Red Lotus' grumpy face, Yunshi still wanted to save this young man. Everything has a price. If 10 times is not enough, how about 20 times the price of common bread? I always think that people should be more sensible in their lives. The young servant shook his finger in the air with a look of discontent. My name is Chi Hui. I'm the servant of the Witch Palace. If you give me the bread and let me present it to the twin witches, it would be a great honor for you. Oh. Is this the so-called robbery? Golden Crow Princess opened her eyes wide looking at Chi Hui's confident face. No, it's called by force. Princess, don't look at this. Yunshi felt that it wasn't good for a child to see this scene, even though she was actually a god. This bastard, shame on him. Red Lotus finally couldn't help it and drew out her Red Lotus holy sword. Countless sparks spread from the sword and made the temperature of the whole street rise. Why do I feel hot? Chi Hui raised his head and looked at the sky in confusion. Let me make it clear. Master Red Lotus and White Lotus want your bread. You have to sell it if you still want to live in the White Lotus sword domain. Finding that today's weather was somewhat unusual, Chi Hui was somewhat anxious and couldn't wait to grab Yunshi's bread. Red Lotus and White Lotus want the bread. Yunshi looked at Chi Hui with a strange look. Well, what he said was indeed correct. Yes, I like this bread very much. Suddenly, White Lotus' voice appeared behind Chi Hui. Yes, this bread is delicious, but I don't need you to buy it. Red Lotus gritted her teeth. Since White Lotus had appeared, she didn't need to hide anymore and naturally appeared beside White Lotus. Ha! Ha! Chi Hui was appalled. His mouth opened and closed like a salted fish stranded on the beach. Big drops of sweat kept streaming down from his forehead. I must be too tired. Yes, it's just a delusion. No, it's true. Don't delude yourself. Yunshi looked at Chi Hui with sympathy. He had tried to save Chi Hui, but he didn't realize it and catch the opportunity. Wait. I have something to say. I've done my best for the Witch Palace. I just want to buy the bread, and I'm going to pay for it. Shame on you. Is this how you do your best for the Witch Palace? Red Lotus cocked her eyebrows. She usually didn't take care of the daily affairs of the Witch Palace, but now, it seemed that this was a big mistake. Sure enough, none of the men in the world are good. You're fired, now, right away. Get out of the sword tip area and you are never allowed to enter this area again. Red Lotus brandished her sword, and Chi Hui was instantly blown off to the sky. Of course, he wouldn't die, but after falling down to the ground, he had to stay in bed for more than 10 days, and the fact that he was punished by the twin witches personally was really a big blow to his life. Since this was no accident, there was no room for him in the White Lotus sword domain anymore. Well, I told you to leave. Yunshi sighed and shook his head. This bread is delicious. Watching this human comedy with great interest, Golden Crow Prince ate the third piece of bread. They are the twin witches. Master Red Lotus and Master White Lotus. Oh, my God. People who looked at Yunshi with sympathy before now looked at Red Lotus and White Lotus in surprise. Pat. Some knelt down first, and just like dominoes that fell down, soon, people around Red Lotus and White Lotus all knelt down. Some old men even prayed to the twin witches in tears. Lord Witches, please bless my children to pass the entrance examination of the Sword Palace next year. Lord White Lotus, please let my children become smart. Lord Red Lotus, please bless my grandson's wife to have a baby soon. Chapter 519, A Date with the God, 3, Oh, my. Looking at the people kneeling on the ground densely around them, Red Lotus was embarrassed. They were indeed witches, but they were not the witches of gods. The Witch Palace treated all gods equally and traded with gods in the sacrificial ceremony, however, they didn't believe in any gods. Unfortunately, the vast majority of ordinary people couldn't distinguish this. Witches are the girls who serve the gods. Witches equals spokespersons for the gods, and they have incredible divine power, which is what witches were in the eyes of most ordinary people. Coupled with the fact that several legend-ranked witches were themselves gods, and this impression was made even more exacerbated. However, the legend-ranked god witches were just exceptions. They were as rare as the hair of a phoenix and the horns of a giraffe in the history of witches. Most witches could only live in reduced circumstances, collecting resources, and increased their power via holding the sacrificial ceremony. As the young witch of the twin witches, the most powerful witch of battle in the White Lotus sword domain, it was easy for Red Lotus to eliminate her enemies. However, she had no clue when dealing with this kind of problem. Well, everyone, repeat after me. White Lotus obviously had a richer experience on dealing with these kinds of affairs. A mount needs not be high, it becomes noted when on it fairies dwell. A body of water needs not be deep, it would be ensouled if a dragon makes it its resting whereabouts. White Lotus is nowhere, it's right in our hearts. The old people kneeling on the ground repeated White Lotus's words devoutly, and their eyes become brighter and brighter and their spirits were getting better and better. She blinked his eyes and watched the aura spreading quietly between White Lotus and Red Lotus hands. Undoubtedly, this was a high-ranked witch skill, which could silently influence all the people around them. It dispelled the darkness in their bodies and sprinkled morning dew-like aura from their hands. That's good. Biting the bread into her mouth, Golden Crow Princess praised them. Recalling the information he had seen in the Twin Witch's seed, Yunshi understood what secret skill they were using. White Lotus Holy Land. White Lotus Holy Land could bless all people within a range of 10 kilometers, which was a unique skill of the Twin Witches. After appeasing the believers, White Lotus smiled at Yunshi and then cast another spell. The 4 people disappeared on the street in an instant. Thank you, Lord White Lotus. Thank you, Your Highness Red Lotus. Long live our Twin Witches. The people who were cured by the White Lotus Holy Land spontaneously shouted the Twin Witches' names. If there was no accident, what happened here would soon spread throughout the entire White Lotus sword domain in a few days and become the people's topic of conversation. Several streets away, White Lotus once again cast the spell she had just used, sitting with her sister Red Lotus, Golden Crow Princess and Yunshi in a dessert shop. When it came to dating girls, it's a must-do, to come to a dessert store. I really can't stand that. After experiencing the incident just now, Red Lotus's attitude toward Yunshi was more or less softened. Are witches popular? Golden Crow Princess looked curiously at the Twin Witches who had just been worshipped as gods. They should be. It was just too much. Red Lotus nodded first, then shook her head. No matter how much people worshipped them, the situation just now was a bit abnormal, as if people had believed in her and White Lotus as real gods. They were only 16 years old, and when they saw the old people kneeling down to them, they could barely accept it. We are not gods. We should not be worshipped like that. I always feel sorry for everyone. Sister, you are too serious. They don't really expect us to satisfy their desires, they just need a ray of hope. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, no matter how slim and impossible that hope is, they will trust it and can create miracles. Compared with real miracles, hope is actually the greatest reliance people have. Absolute despair is the most terrible thing. White Lotus ordered the desserts and explained why she accepted people's worship. White Lotus, maybe you can really become a god someday. While enjoying the cold juice, Golden Crow Princess praised White Lotus. Gods weren't omnipotent, even the West Queen, the creator of the Kunlun gods' domain, had her own troubles. We witches pursue the power of gods and communicate with them, but we don't have to be gods. God, which is a career from which human beings learn to understand and communicate with gods. Well, here's my banana milk, let's enjoy it together. White Lotus suddenly changed the topic and put a large glass of fruit drink decorated with ice in front of Yunshi, without giving him any chance to refuse. Well, there's only one cup. Big drops of sweat fell on his forehead as he watched the goblet that was 3 times bigger than the common goblet. But there are 2 straws. White Lotus smiled like a child, pointing to a curly straw on the side of the goblet. This, Red Lotus looked at her smiling sister in astonishment as if she was a complete stranger. When did her sister, White Lotus, become so enthusiastic? Her eyes were filled with a satisfied and happy smile. Where is her shy, timid sister, the sister who always hid behind her? Let's drink together. White Lotus gave Yunshi one of the straws and said with a tempting breath. Yunshi wanted to say no, but somehow when he looked at White Lotus' eyes, he couldn't say anything. I'm just thirsty. I just ate too much bread and need to drink water. Yunshi blushed, hinting at himself, and approached the fruit drink. In front of his eyes was White Lotus' delicate face. They were so close that Yunshi could even feel the breath from White Lotus' nose. Which is sweeter, the banana dessert or White Lotus? It was really a question that was hard to answer. Red Lotus looked at her sister, who shared the same cup of fruit drink with Yunshi, and felt a strong sense of loss. From their childhood, she and White Lotus had never been separated for a second because of the invisible threads on their hands. They learned together, practiced together, bathed together, helped each other change clothes, and even fell asleep together. White Lotus and Red Lotus were inseparable. The relationship between them was closer than any sisters. Oh, is this really delicious? Golden Crow Princess watched them with curiosity. Great God, if you like it, try it. White Lotus recommended this drink that could increase her friendship with her. Yes, isn't drinking from the same cup of dessert the best interpretation of friendship? Good. Golden Crow Princess stood on her chair, laid her hands on the table, opened her little cherry mouth, and held the straw with expectation. Compared with Golden Crow Princess's tiny body, the table and chair in this dessert store were a little too big, which made Golden Crow Princess's behavior more lovely. Well, this feeling was like going shopping with your little daughter and buying her food. If only there wasn't the big sister who was staring at him in a hostile manner, everything would be better. Yummy. After half a cup of banana dessert, Golden Crow Princess satisfactorily returned to her sitting position and tilted her little feet with a happy look on her face. You are welcome. White Lotus said in a natural tone. Wait a minute. I'm thirsty too. For the first time, Red Lotus lied in front of White Lotus, and her heartbeat was so strong that she felt that such a lie would be exposed at once. Sister, drink. White Lotus didn't reveal her sister's clumsy lie and smiled, handing Red Lotus her straw. Coo. Coo. Goo. Red Lotus took White Lotus' place and stared at the maid sitting on the other side, sipping the cold and refreshing fruit drink. Don't rush, sister. White Lotus chuckled. For the first time, she saw that her sister was so anxious and jealous. If my sister can't drink it up, can you drink with me again? Hearing White Lotus's voice, Red Lotus's eyes suddenly became serious and she began to sip the remaining half of the fruit drink more diligently. Are you kidding me? How can I let you be so intimate with White Lotus again? Even if the god could permit this happening, as a sister, I will never permit it. Yunshi looked at Red Lotus and felt a little nervous. Unlike White Lotus, Red Lotus was a dangerous person whose combat power wasn't even inferior to Hua Hua in the dream trial. If White Lotus was a pure and flawless flower, then Red Lotus was absolutely a flame that could burn the sky and heaven. The personality of the two people seemed to be the same as their names, containing distinct characteristics. However, apart from these, Red Lotus and White Lotus were exactly the same. Yes, after such close observation, Yunshi was surprised to find that Red Lotus and White Lotus were the same, just like the front and back of a mirror. If it wasn't because their clothes were in different colors, Yunshi was not confident that he could distinguish them. One more straw, please. Just as Red Lotus sipped, White Lotus used her hidden weapon, asking for the third straw. All right. The waiter smiled and quickly brought the third straw, which made Red Lotus's mind totally go blank. Sip. 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 In the quiet dessert store, White Lotus' face was filled with a cheerful smile. She enjoys the special 3-person dessert together with her sister Red Lotus and Yunshi. In the scene reflected by the ice shaking in the goblet, the three people's expressions were different. Yunshi was distressed, surprised, and finally helpless. Red Lotus was shocked and distressed. She wanted to say something but didn't dare say it. She wanted to give up but couldn't give up. Finally, she could only surrender and accept the fact. Undoubtedly, there was only one winner in the end. White Lotus. Red Lotus stared at Yunshi as if she was a big grey wolf who was looking at a little white rabbit. Yunshi kept silent and tried to ignore Red Lotus' eyes. Red Lotus sipped the drink and continued to threaten Yunshi with her evil eyes. Yunshi still kept silent and tried to show his goodwill with a smile. Crack. Red Lotus almost bit off the straw. She raised her eyebrows like an angry dragon. You're not Hua, you are just a maid. Why does White Lotus think so much of you? She not only let you attend our precious sacrificial ceremony, but also invited you to share the fruit drink with her. Even I myself had never come here with White Lotus and shared the same cup of dessert in such an embarrassing way. I'm so envious of you. No, it's so uninteresting. If you can understand what I'm thinking through my eyes, you'd better quickly release the straw and immediately disappear for me. Yunshi showed a bitter smile. He really wanted to immediately disappear from here, running away from this witch who was staring at him with killing intention in her eyes. Unfortunately, this wasn't something he could make a decision on. If he said that he wanted to leave, White Lotus wouldn't allow it, and more importantly, Golden Crow Princess, who was curious about his palm print, wouldn't allow it either. Oh, I really want to become a fish and swim in the vast sea, or turn into a bird, flying in the endless sky. For the first time, Yunshi found that freedom was such a luxurious right. After studying Yunshi's palm print, Golden Crow Princess showed a very satisfied smile on her face. Great God, you know physiognomy? White Lotus looks at Golden Crow Princess's smiling face with curiosity. No, but Mai's hands are beautiful, soft, and comfortable. Golden Crow Princess didn't hide her mind at all. Her little face turned red because of excitement, looking like a pink apple. Oh, of course, it's very soft. White Lotus narrowed her eyes and wasn't sure whether Golden Crow Princess was joking or taking it seriously. She had used her secret skill, the Great Circulation, to predict her future with the prince many times, but all she got was no accurate result every time. Mortals followed a fixed trajectory of life, therefore, it was easy to predict their future using the Great Circulation. Hero-ranked beings had the ability to modify their own trajectory of life. It was very difficult to predict their futures. The accuracy rate of her Great Circulation was only about 30%. As for the legend-ranked beings, basically no one can predict their future, unless it was a legend-ranked being who had the same ability as Ouroboros. Unfortunately, till now the only well-known hero-ranked prophet was Ouroboros, and every time it predicted the future, it would be unable to predict again for many years. The fact that the Great Circulation couldn't figure out the future of the prince only meant one thing, that the fate of the prince was far beyond any people's imagination. Every time she used the Great Circulation, she could see distinct futures. In the first future she had seen, the prince would become the owner of a small bread store and give up his childhood, marrying 3 or 4 girls in the small town, having a lot of children with them. And this was also the commonest and most deceptive future. In the second future, it seemed that at the age of 18, he would meet a miss of a rich family and fall in love with her at first sight. After that, he would give up his childhood sweethearts and leave the small town, and then get involved in the inheritance dispute of a country and become the lover of a queen. Incidentally, this queen was now the leader of the Starwing Knights. Who are you? In the third future, he would be lost in the mountains and then accidentally meet a girl who had just awakened her fighting talent. He would join the team formed by the girl and becomes an excellent supporter. Finally, he and the girl would get married and travel around the world. The girl who saved the prince in the third future was now also in the Starwing Knights. Her name was Xiao Cao. White Lotus had calculated 37 different futures. It could be said that every girl of Starwing Knights had a special relationship in their future with the prince. In these futures, the prince's identity was constantly changing, but there was only one thing unchanged. Amongst all the futures, the prince would marry more than one girl. Amongst all the futures, his invincible childhood sweetheart, Hua, would become a loser. She would be knocked out of the competition even before the competition began. Finally, no matter which future it was, she and her sister didn't even appear once. Judging from this, White Lotus guessed that these futures may have existed in the past, but they must all be over now. From the moment they and the prince met in the dark forest, the wheel of fate had been turned to a completely different direction. It also meant that the futures she observed were just the futures that existed in the past. When the twin witches and the prince encountered each other, their futures had been forever changed. No, maybe even earlier, their fate had been connected with the prince. The more White Lotus observed the prince, the more threads of fate she could find that were being projected from all directions of the vast sky, twining around the prince. This also led to a result that anyone who wanted to predict the prince's fate couldn't get the right answer. No one, not even a god, could figure out all his threads of fate. Well, is this also a talent of the prince? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.